Chapter 1031. This simulated star map is interesting. Wuming showed a thoughtful expression. When Az Dakaha had fought with Wuming, he had only used the new ability that he had obtained after assimilating with the Black Origin Mud. He had not used any of his original abilities. Even if he had used it, he had only used the Hegemon's Halo. Wuming had thought that Az Dakaha had underestimated his opponent. However, it seemed that this was not the case at all. The reason why Az Dakaha had not used his own abilities was because those abilities would not have any effect on Wuming. Az Dakaha had two powerful gifts. One was the simulated star map, Avesta, and the other was the Hegemon's Halo, Kvarina. The former made Az Dakaha invincible in the box world, while the latter was Az Dakaha's signature. Possessing the former was enough for Az Dakaha. What the strong possessed was not some flashy ability, but the ability to defeat the enemy. Eating the world with a single move also existed. However, there were times when one trick to eat everything did not work. For example, Az Dakaha and Tiamat. The reason why Az Dakaha had the Dragon Sun sovereignty and the simulated star map, virtual star Tai Sui, was because Az Dakaha had naturally fused with his body when he broke the seal. That's right. Just like the no-name flag was one of the items that broke the seal, these two items were items that sealed Az Dakaha. The Dragon Sun sovereignty only had the effect of strengthening the spirit core. However, every simulated star map had restrictions. Coincidentally, virtual star Tai Sui's restrictions prevented Az Dakaha from using it. Avesta was also useless against Wuming because Az Dakaha couldn't absorb, cancel, or borrow the power of the Origin. It could only use its new ability after combining with the Black Origin Mud to deal with Wuming. This was why Az Dakaha didn't use its own ability. It was the same for Tiamat. The Sea of Life could be said to be the bane of all things, but after fusing with the Black Origin Mud, Wuming developed a resistance, because Wuming and the Black Origin Mud were of the same origin. In addition, Tiamat had sealed herself, causing Tiamat to be unable to take down Wuming. Wuming was also facing the same problem at this moment. The ability of the Trinity as Daka, one of the 7 great human evils, was also unable to destroy Tiamat. Therefore, when one move was no longer fresh and could no longer dominate the world, a new move was needed. And Kalas found a new move for Wuming, which was the illusory star Tai Sui. Through the contact of his arm with the ball of light, Wuming also learned of the illusory star Tai Sui's ability. It ignored all conditions and forcefully sealed natural gods and star spirits. This was the ability of the illusory star Tai Sui, and Tiamat happened to be a natural god. This was the method that Kalas had mentioned to seal Tiamat. After Kalas's adjustment, the Dragon Sun sovereignty and the simulated star map illusory star Tai Sui in Az Dakaha's body had completely become this spiritual base's item, or rather, its ability. Therefore, Wuming could ignore the restrictions of the illusory star Tai Sui and use it directly. Then, let's begin. After Wuming finished speaking, the ball of light that his right hand touched emitted a huge amount of starlight, which instantly enveloped Wuming's consciousness. In the outside world, the 3-headed demonic dragon controlled by Kalas was hunting down Tiamat's the 11 sons. That's right, the 11 sons of Tiamat were born from the Sea of Life again. And in terms of strength, they were even stronger than the previous 11. However, it was all in vain. One after another, the demonic beasts were killed by the 3-headed demonic dragon. Sun-like flames shot out from the Sun Lion's mouth and attacked the 3-headed demonic dragon. The pure white 3-headed demonic dragon threw away the corpse of the demonic beast that had died long ago. It then clawed at the fire of the sun, causing it to explode. Following that, the 3-headed demonic dragon gathered the flames and flashes that had once destroyed 1/3 of the world in its mouth and engulfed the lion. The sky had become dark at some point, and the storm carried a tornado that swept toward the 3-headed demonic dragon like a petrel. The 3-headed demonic dragon spread its shadow wings, which turned into a curtain that covered the sky and directly cut the tornado in half. However, the curtain did not stop. As if it had a life of its own, it directly slashed at the dark mass in the sky and instantly cut it in half. The last two demonic beasts, Ugger and Umwdbltu, were eliminated. At this point, the 11 newborn demonic beasts were all killed by the three-headed demonic dragon. However, when the three-headed demonic dragon was eliminating the 11 sons, Tiamat was not idle. Another strange song was heard. Suddenly, the entire Sea of Life was in a riot, as if it was boiling. In the next second, the 11 sons reappeared from the Sea of Life. No, not only 11 demonic beasts, but more and more demonic beasts emerged from the Sea of Life. Moreover, all of them had the same strength as the 11 sons. Without a doubt, this move was the product of the fusion of Tiamat and the Black Origin Mud. It was impossible for Tiamat alone to give birth to so many powerful demonic beasts in such a short time. Among them, the most numerous and the most powerful was the winged Ramu. When Wuming controlled the three-headed demonic dragon, he used the tyrant's halo to clean up the Black Origin Mud on the land. At the same time, he also cleaned up the Ramu and the few mermaid Kuru that were scattered all over the land. There are no longer any demonic beasts on the land, except for the sea. Any one of these demonic beasts had the strength to rival or even defeat goddesses such as Ishtar, Quizzard, and Ereshkigal. Looking at the number of demonic beasts, if all of them swarmed up, the entire Mesopotamia would probably be destroyed quickly. The Uruk's protective shield would definitely not be able to protect them. However, the three-headed demonic dragon did not panic when it saw this scene. The chain wrapped around the right head extended, and the tip of the chain gently scratched the huge dragon's body. PFFF. The three-headed demonic dragon's body was sliced open like a hot knife through butter. A sizable wound was cut open, and fresh blood spilled out as if it was free of charge. The spilled blood did not fall into the Sea of Life. Instead, it turned into white figures with small shadow wings and flew into the air. They were miniature versions of Azidakaha. Azidakaha's innate ability was that its blood could turn into a two-headed dragon with god-level strength. This spiritual base was based on Azidakaha's body, so it naturally included this ability. Moreover, it was an upgraded version. The blood didn't transform into a two-headed dragon, but a miniature version of Azidakaha. Roar! The miniature versions of Azidakaha let out a huge roar that was different from their tiny bodies. They rushed towards the demonic beasts that were several times, or even dozens of times larger than them. The huge demonic beasts that emerged from Tiamat's Sea of Life also met the miniature versions of Azidakaha. At this moment, the head in the middle of the three-headed demonic dragon seemed to come back to its senses and became energetic. Chapter 1032. Master, you're back. As soon as Wuming returned, Kalis relinquished control of the body to Wuming. I've come into contact with the illusory Star Taisue's ability, and I can activate it at any time. As Wuming spoke, he observed the current battlefield and couldn't help but frown. The reason was naturally because of the current situation. Firstly, the number of magical beasts that Tiamat gave birth to shocked Wuming. Secondly, the three-headed dragon army couldn't defeat the magical beast army and was now retreating. As the number of winged Ramu was the highest, both sides were basically fighting in the air, and only a small number of them were fighting on the sea. Whether it was on the sea or in the sky, the three-headed dragon army was retreating. It couldn't be helped. In terms of individual strength, the magical beasts that Tiamat gave birth to were much stronger than the three-headed dragon formed from the three-headed dragon's blood. Even if these three-headed dragons could continue to divide their blood, each individual that was split was weaker than its superior individual. This was the main reason for the phenomenon of them retreating. Wuming immediately had the thought of, I can't delay any longer. Illusory Star Taisui activate. Wuming didn't need to follow the rules to activate the simulated star map, so he only needed to shout or even think about it to activate it. The majestic voice from the three-headed dragon's body was transmitted to the void. All the three-headed dragons and magical beasts that were fighting to the death, including Tiamat, were stunned. The former was due to the deterrence of Wuming's voice, while the latter was purely due to fear. In the next second, a cluster of light that emitted a cosmic starlight emerged from the three-headed dragon's body. The petite size of the cluster of light created a sense of contrast with the three-headed dragon's huge body. However, the threat that the cluster of light brought to Tiamat was far greater than that of the three-headed dragon. A sound wave that was more powerful than before materialized and attacked the three-headed dragon. The three-headed dragon army and magical beast army that were in the path of the sound wave attack were all shattered into powder by the sound wave. Faced with Tiamat's move that was different from the past, Wu Ming became serious. The three-headed demon dragon opened its mouth, and a beam of light belonging to the tyrant's halo enveloped the incoming sound wave, instantly extinguishing the sound wave's follow-up attack. It was a flash of starlight, shot out from Tiamat's eyes of the stars, hidden behind the sound wave. It seemed that Tiamat was also anxious. Wu Ming didn't waste any more time, and had Su Xing Tai Sui take action. You are no longer needed here, primordial goddess of creation. Leave this world that no longer belongs to you. In front of Wu Ming, Void Star Tai Sui's sphere of light fell into the sea of life, and Tiamat's enormous body stopped moving. Tiamat seemed to let out a final cry. In the next second, Tiamat's huge body turned into black mud and merged into the sea. The magical beasts that were born in the Sea of Life were also turned into black mud and fell into the sea. The dark clouds in the sky had already dispersed, and the sun had completely sunk into the west. Night had fallen. In the central region of Mesopotamia, in the fortress city of Uruk, it was nighttime. At this moment, a circle of lights surrounded the Uruk. The Uruk city was also brightly lit. People were celebrating. In order to celebrate the end of the world, Gilgamesh ordered the soldiers to set up a venue in the Uruk city and even outside the Uruk city for people to dance, eat, and thank the gods. The reason why the venue was set up outside the Uruk city was because the Uruk city was not enough to accommodate everyone's celebration. After all the humans in the Mesopotamia region were gathered in the Uruk city at this time. In the current season, the night was not cold. In addition, the outside of the Uruk had been purified by the sea of black mud. The magical beasts had completely disappeared, and there was no need to worry about being attacked. In the Divine Tower, Gadatsi and the others gathered together to enjoy the fruits of victory after the end of the world. However, because the outside of the Uruk had been affected by the sea of black mud, there were very few pastures and farms, and there was a shortage of food. Only a few pastures and farms in the north of the Uruk were still intact. However, this did not change the fact that there was a shortage of resources. Therefore, Gadatsi and the others, as well as the Uruk people outside the Divine Tower, did not have much food to enjoy. The pastures and farms had to be reserved for grain, cattle, and sheep in order to prepare for the future life of the humans in Mesopotamia. Therefore, the people were just immersed in the atmosphere of surviving the disaster. At most, they would dance and eat very little. Of course, this included Gadatsi and the others. In the center of a large room in the Divine Tower, a large dining table was placed there. Gadatsi and the others sat around the table and tasted good wine. Although there was not much food, Gilgamesh could still provide drinks for Gadatsi and the others to drink freely. Of course, Gadatsi, Matthew, Mayu, and Anna were drinking drinks and not wine. The leopard man and Funbaba were playing in an open space at the side. Enkidu, who was worried about Funbaba, was paying attention to Funbaba while having a conversation with Gilgamesh that he had not had for many years. Although Gilgamesh was more or less not used to the fact that his close friend had a gender, a close friend was still a close friend. This would not change. Zhuge Kongming and Leonidas eyed sighed at the sweet and mellow taste of the wine in their hands. Nuwakameru, who was beside them, was drinking alone as if he was mourning from Musasobo Benkei. Quizzard and Ishtar clinked their glasses. Ishtar also poured a glass of wine for the absent-minded Ereshkigal, which gave Ereshkigal a fright. It was only after Mayu, who was beside her, said something to Ereshkigal that Ereshkigal calmed down. Matthew and Gadatsi gently tasted the drinks that Gilgamesh brought out. Gadatsi, who was beside Anna, was also tasting the delicious drink because of Merlin's harassment. She had to pretend that she did not care about the delicious drink. Everyone was immersed in the celebration dinner of Tiamat being defeated by Wuming. But because Wuming was not present, many people were more or less absent-minded. For example, Mayu, Ereshkigal, Anna, Gadatsi, and Matthew. However, Wuming was not dead. He was not there. What the hell is holding assassin back? Gadatsi and Matthew chatted and complained softly. However, everyone present was a servant, and Gadatsi's soft complaint was equivalent to speaking directly in their ears. That I also want to know. After Ereshkigal spoke weakly, Mayu, who was beside her, looked a little shaken, and Anna's eyes also drifted. Gadatsi and Ereshkigal's questions attracted everyone's attention, except for the leopard man. Ishtar looked at Ereshkigal, who became absent-minded again, and shook her head helplessly. Didn't Golden Sparkle say that Hyunryong is now implementing the follow-up work on Tiamat on the coast of the Persian Gulf? He will be here a while. You guys don't seem to see that guy. Did he take your souls away, or something? Ishtar's criticism made Ereshkigal's face turn red. She naturally knew that Gilgamesh said that Wuming was on the Persian Gulf, but Wuming was not there. Not only her, but Gadatsi and the others also couldn't help but be absent-minded. And Ereshkigal had a feeling that Ishtar was actually worried about Wuming, but she didn't directly show it. Therefore, Ereshkigal and Ishtar quarreled again. Oomph. What does it have to do with you that I care about him? You greedy goddess. Do you want to take away other people's thoughts? What did you say, you despicable guy? At that moment, Ishtar also became angry and stared at Ereshkigal. Seeing this, Gadatsi no longer expected to get any information from the sisters, and then turned to look at Enkidu. Seeing Gadatsi looking at him, Enkidu showed a warm smile to Gadatsi. Don't worry, Sir Wuming is indeed dealing with some aftermath matters. He will be back soon. On the coast of the Persian Gulf, Wuming, who had already returned to his human form from the three-headed demonic dragon, was sitting on the collapsed observatory with a light ball in his hand. His eyes were closed as if he was immersed in it. The dragon horn headdress on his head was dutifully guarding Wuming. Unfortunately, there was no danger around at this time. Chapter 1033. Ever since the void star Tai Sui sealed the entire sea of life that represented Tiamat, the Persian Gulf, and even the Indian Ocean returned to their original ocean state. Other than the fact that no living creatures could be seen, the ocean at this moment was no different from before. After that, Wuming also removed the three-headed demonic dragon state, but the spiritual base of human evil still existed. After all, the transformation of the spiritual base was basically complete, and it could not be changed back even if he wanted to. However, there was one thing to note. Wuming could not recreate the three-headed demonic dragon's body with Enkidu and Kalas for the time being. After all, the three-headed demonic dragon's human evil spiritual base was only possible because of the blessings of Tiamat, the first Hassan, and Funbaba, who had temporarily obtained the title of Crown Rider. Now that Tiamat was sealed, and the first Hassan had left after the crisis was over, the Crown Rider on Funbaba had also disappeared. Naturally, the three-headed demonic dragon's form could not be maintained. In other words, it was already a miracle that Wuming could still exist with this spiritual base at this moment. Now that the connection had collapsed, it should have been forced to leave this world. It can only be said that it was convenient to have someone at the top. The reason why Wuming was sitting here was because the Void Star Tai Sui had sealed Tiamat's light ball. Because the spiritual base of Wuming's human evil was still there, the Void Star Tai Sui would not disappear, and the sealed light ball would not dissipate. The reason why Wuming was sitting here and sealing the light ball was actually that he was trying to take out the black mud that had fused with the Sea of Life. After all, the existence that had fused with the black mud would naturally be hostile to Wuming, and Wuming could not sit idly by and do nothing about the black mud. In addition, the foundation of human evil was the love for other humans. No matter what, Wu Ming still had sympathy for Tiamat, especially after Wu Ming studied the light ball and came into contact with Tiamat's wolf for a while. It really makes people sigh. Wu Ming opened his eyes and let out a long sigh. He had no way of completely removing the black soil from Tiamat's sea of life. This could only be done after he returned to the Great Origin. During this time, Wu Ming felt Tiamat's thoughts. I miss the children. I want to come into contact with the children. I want the children to return to my arms, but I'm afraid of bringing harm to the children. This was Tiamat's extremely simple thinking. Wu Ming could use his origin power to kill Tiamat the same way he had killed Aziz Dakaha, but Wu Ming couldn't bring himself to do it. Aziz Dakaha's evil was because he wanted justice to stand on his corpse, while Tiamat's evil was simply a mother's instinct to care for her child who had abandoned her, as well as the world that did not need her. And this mother was also afraid that she would harm her child. Otherwise, she would not have placed a self-seal on herself. Tiamat had only been chosen to become a bug in the human system. This bug had to be fixed in order for the system called humans to continue. And this bug had been created by using the love for humans. Fixing the false love that had been forced to become was a little cruel in Wu Ming's eyes. Aziz Dakaha had already died at Wu Ming's hands. Wu Ming did not want another existence similar to Aziz Dakaha to follow in his footsteps. However, it was obviously impossible to let Tiamat go just like that. Fortunately, I have the illusory Star Tai Sui. If not for this, I'm afraid it would have reached a point where only one of us could live. Ignoring all conditions to seal a natural god, although the target audience was small, the effect was unexpectedly powerful. If not for this, it was hard to say who would die in the end. Wu Ming felt a headache at the thought of so many powerful magical beasts that had been born from the Sea of Life. And fortunately, those magical beasts were formed from the black soil in the Sea of Life. They were also a part of Tiamat. Otherwise, Wu Ming would not have a good way to deal with so many magical beasts at once. And if the time was delayed, who knew how many magical beasts Tiamat could give birth to? The Sea of Life was so big, and Tiamat had the support of the black soil. Who knew what would happen in the end? Therefore, this was why Wu Ming believed that the outcome was still uncertain. In any case, let's bring Tiamat back to the root of life first. Once they returned to the root of life, there would definitely be a way. After all, the root of life was the source of miracles, and Wu Ming was a god inside. Wu Ming shook his head and rested for a while. After relieving his fatigue, he merged the ball of light into his body and stood up. Wu Ming looked at the position of the stars in the sky and estimated the time. At this time, Tachika and the others probably haven't finished their banquet. I should still be able to make it, probably, if not for the last two words. But Wu Ming knew that the Uruk was short of resources at the moment, so he did not expect to be able to eat delicious food. Let's go join in the fun. Wu Ming turned around, and his body disappeared into the portal that had opened at some point in time. Then, the portal closed. On the coast of the Persian Gulf, there was only the night wind blowing the waves and hitting the rocks in boredom. Uruk. Although the Uruk was still brightly lit, most people had collapsed on the ground. Don't get me wrong, they were asleep. They reeked of alcohol, and even some children were no exception. But only a few children reeked of alcohol. This was the scene that Wu Ming sensed when he walked out of the portal that appeared in the sky. Gil really put in a lot of effort this time. I'm afraid the Uruk has run out of alcohol. Alcohol could not replace food, and the people who listened to the king did not drink because of the influence of the apocalypse. So, there was still a lot of alcohol left in the Uruk. There was not much food, so they drank, sang, and danced. This was how the Uruk citizens celebrated tonight. And because the tense minds were relaxed, there were many people who had fallen asleep in and out of the brightly lit Uruk. By the way, most children just fell asleep after relaxing their minds. There were not many children who secretly drank. Although this era was thousands of years away from the modern era, Gilgamesh still protected the children well. After all, children were the future of mankind. No longer paying attention to the scene inside and outside the Uruk, Wu-ming flew straight to the god tower. Anyway, the night was not cold in this season, and there were no beasts outside. Let them sleep. At most, they would have a stiff neck because of the wrong sleeping posture when they woke up the next day. After entering the god tower, Wu-ming went directly to the room where Gadotsi and the others held the banquet. In the corridor near the door, Wu-ming met Siduri. Siduri, haven't you gone to rest yet? When Gilgamesh was slacking, Siduri was the manager. After all, the Uruk citizens couldn't hold a banquet without a manager. Otherwise, it would really be chaotic. Seeing that it was Wu-ming, Siduri bowed first. I'm not tired, Master Hyunryong. Have you finished your work? As an insider, Siduri naturally knew from Gilgamesh and Enkidu that Wu-ming had something to do in the Persian Gulf and hadn't returned yet. Yes, I've finished my work. I came back to see if I can make it in time for the banquet. Immediately, Siduri smiled. You're late. Master Hyunryong, Master Ishtar, and the others have all left. Miss Tachika and Miss Matthew are also asleep at the table. I just met Master Enkidu and asked me to send towel over. Siduri said and raised a piece of white cloth in her hand. It was a wool towel that could be used to cover the body. Even if it was not cold at night, Enkidu was still very caring. Wu-ming nodded as if he understood, then reached out and took the towel in Siduri's hand. Then I'll send it over. Ignoring Ishtar and the other goddesses and Enkidu, he was going to see Gadotsi and Matthew first. All right, Siduri, go and rest now. Immediately, this is the will of the gods. After Wu-ming finished speaking, he directly left. In response, Siduri smiled. Master Hyunryong is really just like Master Enkidu, gentle. Chapter 10:34. Wu-ming had seen how hard Siduri had worked during this period of time. She was not much more relaxed than Gilgamesh. At this time, how could Wu-ming allow Siduri to continue working? However, with Siduri's character, it was certainly impossible for her to rest by herself, so Wu-ming could only order her. He walked quietly into the room where Gadotsi and others were gathered. At this moment, the room was exuding the aroma of good wine. There was no doubt that this was Gilgamesh's collection of good wine. Wu-ming even suspected at this moment that Gadotsi and others fell asleep because of the smell of wine. As soon as he entered the room, Wu-ming saw Gadotsi and Matthew sleeping soundly on the table. The others were nowhere to be seen. Ishtar and the others must have left on their own, and someone like Leonidas I, who got drunk easily, must have been carried away by them. In addition to Gadotsi and Matthew, who were lying on the table, Gilgamesh was looking at the brightly lit Uruk by the window with his hands on his chest. Oh, Hyunryong, you're finally here. Gilgamesh looked back at Wu-ming. I thought I could make it in time for the banquet, but it seems that I'm late. He walked quietly to Gadotsi and Matthew, covered them with a thin towel, and then Wu-ming walked to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh set up runes around Gadotsi and Matthew, so he didn't have to worry about disturbing Gadotsi and Matthew. There wasn't much food, but this king left some good wine for you. Gilgamesh showed a king's smile, and then golden ripples appeared from his body. 2 golden wine cups and a golden wine jug emerged from it. Gilgamesh held the golden wine jug, poured it into 2 golden goblets, and then threw one of them to Wu-ming. The wine cup flew lightly to Wu-ming as if it had a life of its own. Wu-ming didn't use much strength and easily caught it, then drank it in one gulp. Although this wine is delicious, it's not to my taste. Wu-ming threw the empty wine cup away, and the golden wine cup turned into golden particles and dissipated. This king is the same. Gilgamesh also drank it without caring about his image, and like Wu-ming, he threw the golden wine cup and golden wine jug aside, letting them turn into golden particles and return to the king's treasure. No matter how sweet the wine created by the gods is, it is still an existence that this king and humanity must abandon. This was the reason why it was not to his taste. Without responding to Gilgamesh's words, Wu-ming walked to Gilgamesh's side. With his back facing Gilgamesh, Wu-ming stood in front of the window and looked at the starry sky. The Uruk people survived, and you are still alive. The Sumer dynasty can continue, and human civilization can continue. when Wu Ming took away Tiamat, who was sealed in the illusory star Tai Sui, this singularity would also be repaired and return to the right track. What Wu Ming meant was that it was time for him to leave. After all, his purpose was to help Gadatsi and Matthew repair the singularity, and to make up for Wu Ming's regret of leaving Mesopotamia. Whether it was the Gilgamesh of that world, or Wu Ming, who took care of Gilgamesh's childhood, was already half a father to Gilgamesh. I know you won't forget what happened here, and I also know you know very well that the Gilgamesh I am familiar with is the queen. Although, because of the suppression force, Uruk Hyunryong existed in every parallel world, and there was a story between Gilgamesh and Hyunryong, it was impossible for Gilgamesh not to notice this. After all, the stories created by different genders could not be exactly the same. This was for sure. Of course, Gilgamesh, who turned around, nodded without hesitation. After all, the Hyunryong this king is familiar with can be said to be a woman. You can't be the one this king is familiar with. Wu Ming was shocked. It must be the doing of the two suppression forces. Did it have to be so exciting? Ha 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 ha, this king is joking. It's so nice to see your face. Gilgamesh patted Hyunryong's shoulder as if his scheme succeeded, and he laughed very happily. However, not long after, Gilgamesh stopped laughing. But this king is really happy to see you. After patting Wu Ming's shoulder again, Gilgamesh left the room. At this moment, only Wu Ming, who was looking at the night sky, and the sleeping Gadatsi and Matthew were left in the room. Me too, Gil. As for what Gilgamesh said about Hyunryong in this parallel world being a woman, it was unknown whether Gilgamesh was joking or not. Early the next morning, Gadatsi woke up groggily and found herself lying on the bed in her and Matthew's room in the Chaldean embassy, and Matthew was lying next to her. Hey? Hey. As if she thought of something terrible, Gadatsi's face turned red, and she screamed in horror. What happened, Senior? Matthew had a conditioned reflex because of Gadatsi's scream. He suddenly woke up from his sleep and sat up. No, nothing. I just woke up and had a nightmare. Gadatsi was silently relieved. After all, she found that the clothes she was wearing did not change. It seemed that someone sent her and Matthew back here and put them directly on the bed. Suddenly, a voice came from the corner. Are you awake? Tachika, Matthew? Gadatsi and Matthew looked and found that it was Wu Ming. Assassin? Did you send me and Matthew back? Gadatsi guessed. Wu Ming, who was sitting cross-legged in the corner, nodded. Seeing that you were sleeping soundly, I didn't wake you up. Instead, I sent you back here. Wu Ming pointed to the bed where Gadatsi and Matthew were, and then pointed to the corner where he was, and then continued to speak. I didn't know where to go, so I just stayed. But don't worry, I didn't stare at your sleeping faces the whole night. Wu Ming smiled. However, the more Wu Ming said this, the more embarrassed Gadatsi and Matthew felt. Then, I'll go down first. Gadatsi immediately got up from the bed and walked out of the room. Senior Villo, I'm a little worried about you. I'll go downstairs and take a look. Then Matthew also left with a blushing face. In this regard, Wu Ming smiled. Gadatsi and Matthew were really quite cute. By the way, last night, Wu Ming did not stay because he had nowhere to go, nor did he stay to see Gadatsi and Matthew's sleeping faces. The reason why Wu Ming stayed in Gadatsi and Matthew's room was because Roman contacted Wu Ming through Gadatsi's bracelet last night. Chapter 1035. Last night, after Gilgamesh left, Wu Ming also left not long after. However, Wu Ming left with Gadatsi and Matthew. The method was simple. Whether it was using magic or mental power, Wu Ming could take the two away without waking them up. After returning to the Chaldean embassy, Wu Ming saw Merlin, who was secretly eating at the table on the first floor. After chatting with Merlin for a while, Wu Ming took Gadatsi and Matthew upstairs. By the time the two of them had settled down, it was already the latter half of the night. Just as Wu Ming was about to leave to find a place to rest, Gadatsi's wristband rang. Hyunryong, no, the root dragon. I have something to talk to you about. Roman was someone who knew Wu Ming's true identity, and Wu Ming also knew Roman's true identity. And Roman came to Wu Ming so mysteriously at this time, and even addressed Wu Ming as the root dragon. It seemed that there was something big going on. Less than 20 employees of Chaldea have gone to rest. The director and her followers are still maintaining the Holy Grail and will not let Chaldea contact the outside world. Da Vinci has also returned to his workshop. Tachika and Matthew are also asleep. So, Roman came to contact Wu Ming when no one else was around. Obviously, he must have something important to say. Are you feeling uneasy about the enemy who burned humanity? Wu Ming asked casually. On Chaldea's side, Roman fell silent. It was obvious that he did not expect Wu Ming to tell the truth. It was not difficult to guess. Roman came to Wu Ming secretly because he did not want others to know. Only secrets must be kept, and there was indeed a secret between Roman and Wu Ming. That was, Wu Ming and Roman knew each other's true identities, and this involved the mastermind behind the burning of humanity. After all, Gydia and Roman were inextricably linked. So, Roman came to Wu Ming because of Gydia. No, to Roman, it was because of the mastermind behind the scenes, the fake Solomon. After all, Wu Ming did not tell Roman that the fake Solomon was the tactic Gydia created by Solomon. I don't know why, but I keep feeling uneasy. I know you know the enemy situation very well. Can you tell me, Roman did not know the details of the enemy. Wu Ming did not tell him, and he only saw a hint of danger before he gave up his power. However, I refuse. Wu Ming refused without thinking. Wait a minute, why, even Roman could hear Wu Ming's perfunctory tone. The reason is simple. Wu Ming found a stool and sat on the bed where Gadotsi and Matthew were. He chatted with Gadotsi's wristband, although it was a little strange to chat with someone who was sleeping soundly. Anyway, there was magic on Gadotsi and Matthew. He did not have to worry about waking up Gadotsi and Matthew. You're now a human, Roman Acheron. You're no longer any powerful existence. You don't have the ability to save everything. You've been like this since you became a human. You're just an ordinary medical staff. Wu Ming did not know if Roman had a trump card. Even if he did, it was uncertain whether it would be effective against Gydia, who had the black soil. And there was one more thing. Roman was a human at the moment, and he was a human who was not as good as Gadotsi. The matter of defeating the mastermind behind the scenes was not his responsibility. He was qualified to take back the future of mankind as a human. However, he could only do it as a human. As a human, he did not have the power to do it. This was the price he had to pay for giving up all his power to become a human, even if he'd seen the crisis of mankind on the eve of giving up his power. In a sense, this was what he deserved. If it's you, you should understand one thing. Everyone has to admit the consequences of their decisions, whether the consequences are good or bad. So, you just have to be an honest medical staff. Roman, who heard this sentence, was sitting on a special sofa in Chaldea. He pressed one hand on the other hand as if he was touching something under the glove. Roman's expression was a little lonely. But that's enough from you, once King Solomon. Wu Ming instantly interrupted Roman's words and also revealed Roman's true identity. That's right, Roman was King Solomon. He was the follower of the former director, Maris Billy Animosphia, who participated in the Winter Wood Holy Grail War 10 years ago. After winning the Holy Grail War, he became an ordinary human by making a wish. On the eve of losing all his power and becoming a human, he used his clairvoyance to see the burning of humanity. However, because he was powerless, he could only desperately learn in an attempt to use the identity of a human to save the future. That was why he, the real one, thought that the guy who called himself Solomon was a fake. He was also almost suspected by Gadotsi and the others because he helped Solomon to explain. You want to be an ordinary person and also want to save the world. How can there be such a good thing in the world? I'm afraid you're a little whimsical. Wu Ming mocked mercilessly. Moreover, this is the result of your own choice. You can't regret it. You have to face it, and admit it. Don't worry about it, and don't try to stop it. You have to know that if the sky falls, there are tall people to hold it up, and you're just an ordinary human now. After that, Roman's rather weak voice came from Gadotsi's bracelet. No, didn't I say that if the sky falls, there are tall people to hold it up? What are you? An ordinary human, worrying about? Roman was frightened by Wu Ming's reprimand and didn't dare to speak. Wu Ming picked his ears as if he was bored. He spoke as if he made the final decision for Roman. In short, your mission is to help Tachika save humanity, heal Matthew's broken body, assist Olga Marie in managing Chaldea, and leave the rest to me. After all, Wu Ming was partly responsible for Gidea's mutation. He couldn't leave the black mud alone. He also had to take responsibility for what the black mud caused. However, the difference between Wu Ming and Roman was that Wu Ming had the ability to solve all of this, and Roman didn't have such ability. Actually, I just wanted to say that my trump card can't be called a trump card 100%. Plus, I don't know why, but I have a bad feeling, so I wanted to ask you to help me. Roman in Chaldea loosened his crossed hands and smiled awkwardly. Wu Ming, who was in a different time and space from Roman, narrowed his eyes helplessly. He looked like a dead fish. If I knew you were so open-minded, I wouldn't have wasted so much time talking to you. That was the meaning in Wu Ming's eyes. Therefore, Wu Ming with dead fish eyes found a corner and sat up, no longer paying attention to Roman. Only Roman's calls echoed in the room until he was almost discovered by the Chaldea personnel who woke up in the night. As for Wu Ming, he sat there until daybreak. That was what happened last night. Wu Ming looked at the door where Gadatsi and Matthew left. Then he stood up and walked out. In fact, although Wu Ming and Roman's conversation was very casual, Wu Ming also had thoughts and speculations. Wu Ming believed that Gidea might have become stronger. Chapter 1036. Roman didn't know that the so-called mastermind behind the scenes was actually Gaia, the magic technique he had developed himself. However, the guy who claimed to be Solomon, who appeared at the London Singularity, was indeed himself. Therefore, in Roman's opinion, the enemy was likely to simply control his corpse and impersonate Solomon. Therefore, no matter how powerful Roman's trump card was, it could only target his controlled corpse and could not eliminate the mastermind behind the scenes. Therefore, Roman did not have much confidence in using his hidden means as a trump card. Under such circumstances, Roman even felt uneasy. This meant that his hidden means were probably useless, which was why he came to Wu Ming. Wu Ming had always believed in intuition, so he also had a certain degree of trust in the intuition of others. What did Roman's worry mean? Roman did not know who the enemy was, but Wu Ming knew very well. This meant that Gidea was likely to have gotten rid of the restrictions of Roman's hidden means, and there was no doubt that Gidea had become stronger. Although Wu Ming was not afraid of Gidea, this information was indispensable to Wu Ming. In short, he would deal with whatever came his way. He bid farewell to everyone first and returned to the route. Not long after, Wu Ming also went downstairs. After going downstairs, what entered Wu Ming's eyes was naturally the scene of Gadatsi and the others eating breakfast. At the rectangular table, Gadatsi and Matthew sat on one side, while Merlin and Anna sat on the other side. The four of them had a rather bland and small breakfast. This was made by Anna. Because there was not much food, it was bland and in small quantities. Wu Ming randomly found a seat and sat next to Anna. He did not know if Gadatsi and Matthew had recovered, but Wu Ming decided to sit opposite them. "You're about to leave. Why don't you have a good meal?" Wu Ming then joked. "Hee, the Uruk is quite short of food at the moment. Let's have breakfast as a memento." Gadatsi answered Wu Ming with a smile, as if she was not the one blushing earlier. "I'm a little reluctant," Matthew said softly. However, Matthew's face was still slightly red. It seemed that Matthew's skin was not as thick as Gadatsi's. After all, we're integrated into the Uruk city. Merlin took a sip of the clear soup and smacked his lips. TSK. It seems that I can't live without Uruk food. Ha ha ha. Even if it was bland, the taste of Uruk had left a mark on Merlin's taste buds in the past 6 months. As expected of Merlin, Anna glanced at Merlin and sneered in a cold voice. After all, it's me. However, Merlin seemed to have received some kind of praise and was quite pleased. Well, who could be more thick-skinned than Merlin? "Anna, are you okay?" Wu Ming, who had chosen to ignore Merlin, suddenly asked Anna beside him. When he chatted with Merlin last night, Wuming learned from Merlin that Anna had used the power of the Holy Grail to transform into Gorgon. Together with Ereshkigal, they had dealt with the 5 powerful demonic beasts that attacked the Uruk. Although Anna had now recovered her body, he was still worried about Anna's wombing, so he decided to ask. "I'm fine." Anna shook her head. Although Sakura Madu was in the Holy Grail that Wuming gave to Anna, the function of the Holy Grail still existed. Using the power of the Holy Grail to transform into Gorgon, and then using the power of the Holy Grail to recover, it would not affect Anna, nor would it cause any harm to Sakura Madu in the Holy Grail. Anna put down the bowl, and then took out a golden crystal from her arms. "I'll give this back to you." After Anna used the Holy Grail, it became like this, but Sakura Madu was still inside. "I'm a servant. I can't bring her back." That was the reason why Anna returned the Holy Grail to Wuming. "I know. I will bring Sakura Madu back to her time." Wuming nodded and put away the crystal. "By the way, assassin, what happened to the Holy Grail in Tiamat's body?" The Holy Grail that disturbed this time was in Tiamat's body, and at this time, Tiamat was defeated by Wuming, so it was reasonable to say that the Holy Grail should have appeared. Matthew's face was also red. He had also forgotten about the Holy Grail. The celebration and fatigue caused everyone to not care about the whereabouts of the Holy Grail. Gadotsi only remembered this matter when she saw Anna return the Holy Grail that Wuming gave her to Wuming. "I sealed the Holy Grail and Tiamat together," Wuming said, and with one hand, a cluster of light appeared in Wuming's hand. These were the seals formed by the virtual star Tai Sui. "Later, I will take away Tiamat's seal along with the Holy Grail. I can't give it to you for the time being." Wuming turned his hand again, and the virtual star Tai Sui that sealed Tiamat disappeared. "This doesn't matter. We have reverse detected the location of the final enemy through the existence that tried to invade Chaldea." Roman's voice came from Gadotsi's wrist. The use of the Holy Grail in Chaldea was basically to analyze and find the person who made it. When Wuming stored the Holy Grail that sealed Floros in Chaldea, Chaldea was almost invaded because of it. However, it was a blessing in disguise. Chaldea unexpectedly located the location of the enemy through reverse search, so there was no need for the Holy Grail. "How about this, Roman? I will go explore first. Tachiko will stay in Chaldea for now." "Why?" Gadotsi looked at Wuming in confusion. She had passed through all 7 singularities, so why did she need to be so careful when facing the final enemy? Moreover, Gadotsi couldn't bear to see Wuming in danger alone. Similarly, Matthew couldn't do it either. Senior Villo, I think it's better for us to go with you." Little Eggplant was rarely serious. However, Wuming smiled. "You've misunderstood. I just need to verify something. If I go with you, I'm afraid I'll hurt you." Both Gurgle and Mashu nodded their heads as if they suddenly understood. With Wuming's powerful strength, it was very likely that he would hurt his allies. However, Roman and Leonardo da Vinci in Chaldea noticed something. How could a strong person like Wuming accidentally hurt his allies? It was obvious that Wuming didn't want Gadotsi to be in danger. But in the end, Roman agreed with Wuming's decision. "All right then. Tachika and Matthew will go back to their rooms to rest after returning to Chaldea. We'll wait for Hyunryong's notice before we act." No matter what, Gadotsi wasn't as powerful as Wuming. She was just an ordinary person. If something happened to her, it would be over. Wuming nodded. "After you finish eating, we'll go to the Divine Tower to bid farewell to Gil and the rest." At the same time, Wuming also freeloaded a meal. Chapter 1037. At the bottom of the tower, Wuming, Gadotsi, Matthew, Merlin, Anna, Mayu, and Ereshkigal came together. The reason why Mayu and Ereshkigal came with Wuming and the others was that when everyone was in the middle of breakfast, Mayu came to the Chaldean embassy with an embarrassed look on her face. Mayu just came to Wuming, and the reason why she took Ereshkigal with her was to repay Ereshkigal for staying the night last night. She took Ereshkigal shopping with her. That's right, Wuming came back late last night, and when everyone finished the banquet, Mayu left with Ereshkigal. After knowing that Mayu was Wuming's sister, Ereshkigal was quite serious about building a small house for Mayu in the underworld. By the way, because Mayu is a servant at the moment, the underworld would not cause any harm to Mayu. Last night, Mayu and Ereshkigal slept in the underworld. At the bottom of the tower, the soldiers who went to report to Gilgamesh returned and invited everyone to enter the tower. Wuming and Mayu walked in the end because Wuming and Mayu whispered to each other. Mayu, I didn't take good care of you. How did you sleep last night? Wuming held Mayu's hand with an apologetic look on his face. First, he tried to remove the black mud that fused with Tiamat. After that, he talked to Gilgamesh and sent Gadotsi and Matthew back to the Chaldean embassy. After that, he discussed with Roman. After that, he thought about the clarity from Roman's words. After all these things were done, the sky was almost bright. Sister El is very good to me. You don't have to worry about me, Brother Wuming, and I'm not an insensible child. Feeling the warmth of Wuming's palm, Mayu responded to Wuming with a warm smile, indicating that she understood him. Wuming couldn't help but sigh. He suddenly remembered Mayu's problem when he was eating. Fortunately, Mayu could find him by herself. However, it was still thanks to Ereshkigal. I have to thank her later. Wuming thought as he watched Ereshkigal's back. Ereshkigal, who noticed that someone was watching her, couldn't help but blush, and her body became stiff. Ereshkigal knew who was looking at her. Only Wuming and Mayu were behind her. It was not intentional. As if it was a coincidence, Gadotsi, Matthew, Anna, and Merlin took the lead, and Wuming and Mayu deliberately stayed behind, so Ereshkigal could only be in this position. El, thank you for taking care of Mayu. Wuming, who walked quickly to Ereshkigal's side, thanked her. As for this name, it was a simplification of Ereshkigal. After all, Ereshkigal was a bit too long. No, it's nothing. Ereshkigal talked about her hair and waved her hand generously. Of course, it would be better if she didn't speak so nervously. You now have my divinity. The underworld can no longer restrict you. For the next period of time, you can live well on this land. This was both Wuming's gratitude to Ereshkigal and Wuming's sympathy for Ereshkigal's past. Yes, you are leaving soon. Ereshkigal, who was originally nervous, suddenly became lonely. This was the tragedy brought about by time travel. The two sides were not of the same era, and they had to be separated in the end. Humans basically prohibited or restricted the technology of time travel. This was also one of the reasons. Ereshkigal sped up and distanced herself from Wuming and Mayu. Brother Wuming, can't we meet Sister El again? At this moment, Mayu also seemed a little unhappy. Children were very emotional, especially little girls. Although Mayu had experienced life and death, it did not mean that she had adapted to it. On the contrary, Mayu was more sensitive to such things. In addition, Ereshkigal's temper and personality were very suitable for Mayu's liking. Mayu was familiar with her face, so the two got along well in this short time. For Mayu's question, Wuming smiled casually. How is it possible? When everything is solved, we can come to see your sister El again. We can even bring her to live in the modern world. For humans, time travel was a dangerous function that needed to be restricted or prohibited, but for Wuming, it was something that could be done casually. Really? That's great, Brother Wuming. Mayu recovered again. Seeing Mayu become emotional, Wuming touched Mayu's head with some emotion. You have changed a lot during the time I was not around you. It seems that the contact with Ilya and others has made Mayu grow stronger. Really? Mayu herself was unaware of it. You are cuter than before, after Wuming said jokingly. He directly picked up Mayu and put her on his shoulder. Later, in Mayu's shy exclamation, Wuming dragged Mayu, who was riding on his neck, and followed most of the people in front. God's tower, between the thrones, where Gilgamesh dealt with government affairs. At this moment, the servants and gods gathered together, and unrelated people, such as soldiers, were ordered to leave the room by Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh put down the clay tablet in his hand and looked at the people gathered below with a smile on his face. By the way, at this time, Wuming had put Mayu down from his shoulder. Is it finally time to say goodbye, everyone? Gilgamesh first glanced at the servants he summoned, and now only Nuakamu, Zhuge Kongming, Leonidas I, and Merlin were left. Then Gilgamesh looked at Ishtar, Quizzard Coil, Ereshkigal, and Anna standing in the corner. In a sense, the three goddesses' alliance finally stood on the side of humans. Later, Gilgamesh looked at Wuming and Enkidu standing together, and Wuming's sister in modern times. His sister aside, Wuming and Enkidu would certainly not stay here. They had their own things to do. Ignoring the leopard man and Funbaba, who were hiding and playing, Gilgamesh finally looked at Gadatsi and Matthew. The last master of mankind, Tachika Fujimaru, and her servant, Matthew Gilead, this king has seen your performance during this time in Uruk. Although you are still very weak, this king believes that even without the help of Hyunryong and others, you can still save this era. Gilgamesh's praise made Gadatsi and Matthew quite happy. After such a long time of contact and communication, Gadatsi and Matthew were no longer afraid of Gilgamesh. They now sincerely admired this most ancient king. King Gilgamesh, thank you and everyone for taking care of us during this time. We will not forget you. This was a farewell. Gadatsi didn't just look at Gilgamesh. She also looked at everyone around her. Tachika, especially me, you have to remember me well. Quizzard came to Gadatsi and hugged Gadatsi, making Matthew panic. And me, don't forget the great leopard man. No one knew when the leopard man ran over and joined in the fun. You are a master. Maybe you can summon us as servants to your side. Ereshkigal's tone was quite serious. Although you can't summon us deity-level servants, that's all that matters. Ishtar said mercilessly with his arms crossed. Goodbye, everyone. Anna's farewell was quite concise. In Anna's view, even if a human master couldn't summon god-level servants, there was still a chance to meet them. Lord Fujimaru, you could try to summon me next time. I will kill all your enemies for you. Nuakamaru seemed to have walked out of the shadow of sadness, worthy of being a warrior. Me too, but remember to exercise your muscles often. At the last moment, Leonidas, I took off his helmet. Exercise of the mind is the most important thing. Zhuge Kongming interjected. However, as writers said, we are not god-level servants. You could try to use the fate left by your contact with us during this period of time to summon us. Zhuge Kongming took out a cigar from his pocket and lit it. I know everyone. In short, I will try to summon you, Gadatsi said after getting rid of her big sister's hug. By the way, since this era is safe, will the servants stay? Matthew thought about it. When Hyunryong takes Tiamat and the Holy Grail away, the servants will disappear one after another. At most, only the god-level servants will be able to hold on for a while. Merlin explained. In the end, Wuming also walked in front of Gadatsi and Matthew. Listen to Roman first. When you return to Chaldea, go to your personal room and rest. When I need you, I will use my means to inform Chaldea. I look forward to fighting side by side with you next time. Tachika, Matthew. Finally, after Enkidu also said goodbye to Gadatsi and Matthew, Gilgamesh spoke again. In this era, the Mesopotamia of BC has been saved by Chaldea. Now, this king orders you to leave here, go to the last singularity, and destroy the final enemy. Roman, who was in Chaldea, heard Gilgamesh's last call. After responding, he immediately began to transfer Gadatsi and Matthew's ray shift. Tachika, Matthew, the ray shift has begun. Get ready. Yes, doctor. In the next second, the two's body began to glow, blue particles of light. Fufu suddenly ran out from the corner when the two were about to leave, followed by Funbaba, who was interested in Fufu. After that, Fufu jumped into Matthew's arms. Matthew almost forgot about Fufu. Where did Fufu go? Gadatsi lamented Fufu's powerful hide-and-seek ability. Everyone goodbye. Gadatsi waved to everyone, and Gadatsi, Matthew, and Fufu turned into blue particles and dissipated. After witnessing Gadatsi and Matthew's ray shift, Wuming looked at Enkidu and Mayu, who were hugging Funbaba. We should also go. Chapter 1038. Inside the origin that looked like a starry sky, on the platform formed in the center, the huge and magnificent white origin dragon opened its eyes and woke up from its slumber. The first thing it did when it woke up from its slumber was to open a virtual screen in the void. The scene on it was an elementary school in a certain world. Wuming, who was in the origin, had the ability to see what was happening in a certain world. Suicune Original Academy Elementary School, where Mayu and Ilya went to school. Before Wuming left, he brought Mayu, Ilya, and the others back to Ilya's world. In any case, Mayu had settled down in Ilya's world and went to school. Wuming wouldn't do such a cruel thing as separating Mayu and her friends. However, because of the Ainsworth family's technology and the method of crossing between two worlds taught by Wuming, Shiro and the others could go to Mayu's world to visit Mayu at any time. On the screen, Mayu was chatting with Ilya and other friends, but then Mayu froze for a moment, and then, as if waking up from a dream, she fell into a trance. It seemed that Mayu had received the memory of herself, turning into a servant and going to BC. Although it didn't matter if she couldn't receive it, Mayu's servant body was also Mayu. Wuming didn't want anything to happen to Mayu's clone. The heroic spirits in the Valhalla couldn't accept all the memories of the clone, but Mayu wasn't a heroic spirit, so she could definitely receive those memories. Only when Mayu's main body received the memories and information of the clone could it prove that the clone had returned safely. Now it seemed that Mayu had indeed received it, and Wuming was relieved. Mayu's trance scared Ilya. Seeing Ilya nervously wanting to pull Mayu to the infirmary, Wuming couldn't help but laugh. Ilya is still so rash. But to Wuming's surprise, he saw an equally nervous Erica on the screen. It was very likely that Julian had used the Ainsworth family's technology to send Erica to this world and arrange for her to attend school with Mayu and Ilya. In this regard, Wuming wasn't worried at all. Julian was probably just thinking about his sister and wanted Erica to experience the life of a normal person. Julian was like an elder brother now. With a thought, the virtual screen disappeared. After all, Wuming only wanted to check on Mayu's condition and nothing else. Next, it's Tiamat, Wuming said. With a thought, a ball of light exuding the light of the universe appeared in front of Wuming. This was the illusory star Taisui that sealed Tiamat. Let's begin. As if God had said, "Let there be light," the illusory star Taisui was unsealed under the command of God of the origin. Countless black mud rushed out and fell into the origin. In the next second, the entire space of the origin seemed to have come alive and eliminated the black mud at the root. The black mud, which was originally like a river bursting out of a dam, shrank again and quickly disappeared. In the end, only a little bit was left. This was Tiamat's black mud, her sea of life. The black mud that existed in it had all been treated as a virus by the origin and cleaned up by the origin. Immediately afterward, Wuming's huge dragon claw gently tapped the sea of life, and a figure immediately separated from the sea of life. It was the spiritual base of a servant. It was Musasobo Benkei. After being assimilated by Tiamat's sea of life, there was no way to remove it. This was what Ishtar had said, and it was also publicly known. However, in the origin, Wuming could easily separate Musasobo Benkei's spiritual base from the sea of life. Wuming's dragon claw gently tapped Musasobo Benkei's spiritual base, and a ripple appeared behind Musasobo Benkei, enveloping Musasobo Benkei. The ripple then disappeared. Wuming sent Musasobo Benkei back to Uruk, where he would meet with Nuwakamaru and the others for a short time. Then, because of the disappearance of the Holy Grail, they would dissipate together and return to the Martyr's Palace. Musasobo Benkei's matter was taken care of. Then, there was Tiamat's problem. Wuming lowered his red eyes and looked at the pink and somewhat cute starry eyes. In the end, the sea of life turned into Tiamat, but in human form. Tiamat in human form was no different from a normal woman. In fact, her face and figure could even be considered to be of the highest quality in human aesthetics. At this moment, Tiamat in human form was like a human girl. She sat on the ground like a duck with her legs pressed together as much as possible and looked up at Wuming. She had a petite body and 2 arms and 2 legs, but she was almost naked. Only some scales and animal skin covered certain parts of Tiamat's body. There was a pair of huge twisted horns on her head, which were almost identical to the horns on Tiamat's head in dragon form. In human form, Tiamat's mouth didn't split open all the way to the back of her head, but her teeth were also serrated. The only thing that satisfied Wuming was her starry eyes. It couldn't be helped. Those starry eyes, together with Tiamat's current appearance, were simply too cute. I really don't know how those gods were able to do it back then. Wuming couldn't help but ridicule. Then, Wuming's huge dragon body changed, and Wuming's dragon body turned into human form. After all, Tiamat was very petite at this moment, and it wasn't easy to talk with her huge body. After landing on the platform, Wuming walked in front of Tiamat. Looking at Tiamat, who stared at him motionlessly, Wuming didn't know what to say. He simply sat down facing Tiamat, crossed his arms, and thought silently. If he sent her back, as a human evil, she would definitely be destroyed in the end. Wuming definitely wouldn't do that. Should he send her to another world? If it was another world, he didn't know if Tiamat's human evil ability would still work. Let's give it a try. If it didn't work, he would take her back and think about it at length. However, just as Wuming was thinking, Tiamat moved. Tiamat leaned forward slightly, stretched out her hands, and hugged Wuming's head. Then, while Wuming was in a daze, Tiamat put Wuming down. Then, she placed Wuming's head comfortably on her lap. Obviously, it was a knee pillow. Wuming didn't react at all. Or rather, Wuming was dumbfounded. Although the black mud was removed, Wuming also thought that Tiamat might attack him. However, he didn't think that Tiamat would give him a knee pillow. This was too ridiculous. Wuming couldn't believe it at all. However, it was quite comfortable, child. My child. A delicate and ethereal voice came out of Tiamat's mouth. Wuming had some guesses about this. Tiamat's desire for children led her to treat Wuming as her own child, and the knee pillow was just a way for Tiamat to love her child. However, the one she should love wasn't herself. She should love someone else. Shaolin, come out for a second. Wuming swung his hand and threw out the golden chain wrapped around his arm. The chain turned into a beautiful green-haired person. Enkidu, Lord Hyunryong, do you want me to replace you? Enkidu smiled bitterly. She wasn't stupid, and she had been watching from the side. How could she not understand Wuming's meaning? Just call me Wuming at this time. We're not in Uruk anymore. Wuming corrected her. Yes, Lord Wuming. Then, Wuming nodded. Also, you're right. Come and enjoy Mother's love for me. Ever since Enkidu came out, Tiamat had noticed her. Enkidu smiled bitterly again and walked to Tiamat's side. Then, without a doubt, she was also put down and laid on Tiamat's knee pillow. Chapter 1039. The current Enkidu was Enkidu after fusing with Kingu, so Enkidu could be considered Tiamat's son. That was why Wuming wanted to let Enkidu enjoy this motherly love on his behalf. However, why do I have to continue resting on my knees? Wuming tilted his head and body as if he was resting on a pillow. There's no other way, Lord Wuming. It's probably because you're also Mother's son. Enkidu, who was also leaning on his knees, was facing Wuming with a smile of schadenfreude on his face. Indeed, Hyunryong's rumors mentioned that Hyunryong was Tiamat's son, and that Ulidim and the other magical beast called Wuming Ramu. The connection must have been made. However, Wuming was not Tiamat's son. Even if it was fabricated, it should not affect Tiamat. Why would she really treat Wuming as her son? Although this knee pillow is quite comfortable, I still have things to do. After all, Wuming was going to find Gidia to solve everything. What was the point of resting on her knees? Tiamat seemed to have heard Wuming's words. She muttered and stroked Wuming's cheek. Child, my child. Then Tiamat moved Wuming's head away from her knee pillow. Wuming took the opportunity to sit up and looked deeply at Tiamat. He did not expect Tiamat to be so understanding. It seemed that she was still thinking about her child. How about I raise her as a stepmother? Wu-ming had this idea. Hearing those words, Tiamat's starry eyes involuntarily lit up. She appeared to be very happy. Lord Wu-ming, Mother is probably happy that you've acknowledged her as your mother. Enkidu understood Tiamat. She could tell that Tiamat was very happy. As she spoke, Enkidu tried to sit up. However, Tiamat pressed down on Enkidu's head and stroked it. Wu-ming smiled helplessly. It was not a big deal to have a mother out of nowhere. It was better to have a long-term plan. However, Wu-ming did not directly reject this idea. Let's not talk about my matters for now. I'll have to trouble you to stay here and enjoy the motherly love for me. Similarly, Wu-ming also stroked Enkidu's head. Then I'll have Kalas follow you. If you don't bring me along, I'll be worried. Enkidu's face was slightly red, but she was very serious. I'll always be with Master. Kalas on Wu-ming's head made her presence felt. My backup machine is also close to perfection. I can guard the great source on my own. Then, Wu-ming turned his head and looked into the void. In the next second, little Wu-ming number 1's backup machine suddenly appeared out of thin air. Then, the backup machine steadily walked to Wu-ming's side and lay down on the platform. Once an external entity attempted to enter or attack the great source, Wu-ming's backup machine would be able to defend against it. Using an analogy, the great source was the home, and Wu-ming's backup machine was the AI butler. After Wu-ming activated the backup machine, his body suddenly transformed into a gigantic great source dragon. Then, I'll be leaving. In the next second, the dragon flew to the side and disappeared as if it had fallen into an illusion. Go early. Come back early. Tiamat waved her hand stutteringly at the direction where Wu-ming disappeared, looking very much like a mother sending her son off. Looking at Tiamat like this, Enkidu was a little jealous. You love your child so much. Why did you abandon Kingu? Enkidu and Kingu fused at the Mesopotamia singularity. Tiamat's abandonment of Kingu was naturally engraved in Enkidu's mind. No, that Tiamat stuttered as she explained. Enkidu's eyes lit up when he realized that there might be something behind the scenes. He quietly listened to Tiamat. Tiamat also stuttered as she explained. However, because of her stuttering, it would probably take a while. Between the worlds. In a large world filled with scenes of the universe, huge transparent spheres floated there one after another, like stars in the universe. These huge spheres were worlds. At some point, a huge white figure suddenly appeared. It was Wu-ming in his dragon form. No matter how many times I come, this scene always amazes me. Wu-ming's huge dragon eyes flashed with the light of the universe. Worlds existed in this way, and Wu-ming was very interested in this phenomenon. Let's take a good look around. After all, traveling between worlds was a wonderful thing. Following this, Wu-ming flew in a certain direction. Wu-ming had gone to find Gidia last time, so he naturally remembered the route. However, even if he did not remember, Wu-ming could still find Gidia by relying on the attraction of their origin powers. Not only had Gidia become stronger, but so had Wu-ming. In other words, as long as he stayed in the Great Origin, Wu-ming would continue to grow stronger. In addition, Wu-ming's body had experienced many years in the box world, and the passage of time had become the best catalyst for Wu-ming to become stronger. However, the origin dragon before and after reaching adulthood were two different existences. The difference was like the difference between an ant and a dragon. As an existence who was only one step away from becoming an adult origin dragon, Wu-ming could sense this. In fact, it was best for Wu-ming to wait until he reached adulthood before finding and killing Gidia. That was the safest way. However, time waited for no one. Who knew if Gidia had comprehended something from the Black Origin Mud, or if he had analyzed the power of the Black Origin Mud? And most importantly, Gidia must have had something to do when he burned the human essences, and Wu-ming had to stop him. Now, it was too late for Wu-ming to figure out how to cross that step and reach adulthood. As mentioned before, the adulthood of the origin dragon wasn't something that could be achieved with time alone. As for how to do it, sorry, Wu-ming didn't know. So Wu-ming needed time to figure out. For example, Wu-ming was like a prince who had been stranded in the world. He relied on his own efforts to return to his country, But after finding the palace with great difficulty, he wanted to find a royal family to learn how to become stronger, only to find that the royal family was all dead, and there was no way to find anyone to learn how to become stronger. However, if Wu Ming could stay in the palace for a while longer, he might be able to find a way to become stronger. But this required time, and Wu Ming didn't have time. I'm already very strong now. Even if Gidia completely grasps the secret of the black origin mud, he can only tie with me at best. This was Wu Ming's worst-case scenario. Wu Ming had experienced a lot since the last time he fought Gidia. If Wu Ming encountered Gidia at the same level as last time, he would definitely be able to crush him. However, Wu Ming also knew that Gidia had also become stronger. Even so, Wu Ming was still not afraid. If something really happens, I'll just run back to the origin and hide. Yes, Wu Ming's idea was very simple. If Gidia's strength exceeded his expectations, Wu Ming would run back to the origin and hide. In any case, the origin dragon in the origin was like a tiger in the forest or a flood dragon in the sea. Wu Ming was a god in the origin. However, it wasn't very likely that it would come to that. Let's hurry up and settle everything. With that, Wu Ming sped up and disappeared. Chapter 1040. Between the worlds, in a certain place filled with the scenery of the universe, there was a small, independent world that had separated itself from the original world. At a closer look, it seemed to be a group of open-air platforms of various shapes and colors. There was a spotlessly white platform that was larger than the other platforms. At the same time, it was located on top of the other platforms. The other platforms revolved around this platform that was much taller than them, like stars surrounding the moon. On this spotlessly white platform, there was a spotlessly white jade seat in the center. If it wasn't for the dark universe with specks of starlight as the background, but instead the blue sky and white clouds, this place would probably be a beautiful scenery. However, the spotlessly white jade seat contrasted with the cosmic-like background between the platform and the world, making it stand out and rather eye-catching. On the jade seat on the platform, there was a humanoid existence that was much taller than ordinary humans, sitting upright on the jade seat. He seemed to be the master of this independent small world. He was Gidia, the existence that had impersonated King Solomon and commanded the 72 demon god pillars, the demon god King Gidia. At this moment, he seemed to be waiting for someone. Not long after, a spotlessly white figure flew over from the cosmic-like sky. It was Wu Ming in his dragon form. You seem to be waiting for me. Wu Ming's voice came from the mouth of the origin dragon. Unlike his original rough voice, Wu Ming's voice did not change when he was in his dragon form. Because I knew you would come looking for me. Gidia's voice was as rough as ever. Then do you know that today is the day you die, Gidia? Wu Ming opened his huge dragon mouth, gathering white flames that contained the power of origin. Then he instantly shot it out. This was a killing move filled with power. Rumble. The sound of something huge moving was heard. Countless vines appeared out of nowhere, forming a net that blocked Wu Ming's flames of origin. The net could not withstand the burning of the fire of origin. In an instant, the vines that made up the net were broken and burned to ashes. However, in the next second, new vines would appear to fill in the gaps in the net. Only then was Wu Ming's origin flame blocked. However, upon closer inspection, it wasn't vines that formed the net. Instead, it was pillars of flesh that were covered in eyes. These pillars were the 72 demon god pillars. No, this should be called the 71 demon god pillars now. After all, the concept of Floros was sealed in the Holy Grail by Wu Ming and given to Chaldea for safekeeping. However, even if one of the 72 demon god pillars was missing, it didn't matter. The concept of 72 demon god pillars as a whole could still be maintained. Therefore, these pillars would never be destroyed, and the only way was to get rid of Gidia. Even if Wu Ming's origin flame could burn these pillars of flesh, they were indestructible and could be said to be infinite. The net formed by them was not easy to break through, so there was not much point in continuing like this. As a result, Wu Ming stopped spewing fire. You have always been so impatient, Origin Dragon. It was unknown what had happened to Gaia, but she was calmer than before. Her strength had also increased. Just the fact that his command blocked Wuming's attack was enough to prove this. If Gidia in the past was a stray hyena in the wilderness, then Gidia was now a lone tiger in the forest. Looks like you really obtained something from the black origin soil. Wuming's huge dragon eyes flashed with an expression of as expected. Actually, it's all thanks to you. Gidia was still sitting on his jade throne, looking rather calm. I originally wanted to detonate all the black origin soil I summoned to blow you to smithereens, but I didn't expect the power to affect me as well. Sure enough, Gidia was the same as Wuming at that time, heavily injured by the black origin soil. However, the damage caused by the black origin soil became a catalyst for me, allowing me to successfully obtain the power of the origin. After Gidia finished speaking, a huge amount of magic power rushed out of Gidia's body. This magic power contained a large amount of origin power, which was exactly the same as Wuming's. So what? At best, Gidia stood at the same height as Wuming. In other words, Wuming was the orthodox, while Gidia was the heretic. However, Gidia did not care about Wuming's disdain. Instead, he changed the topic. Do you know why I wanted to burn human reason? Wuming naturally did not know. Humans are ugly, cruel, bloodthirsty, and full of evil. Gidia began to criticize humans. Although there are excellent and kind humans, it is undeniable that most humans are pests on this planet. They are trash, a danger that must be eliminated. Gidia was a little agitated. He even stood up and spread his hands. I want to destroy humans, destroy human history, destroy the proof and records of human existence, and destroy these existences that make me feel disgusted. If that was the case, it was obvious that Gidia had done it. Human history had been burned. If it was not for the influence of Chaldea's magnetic field, humans would have gone extinct. However, this planet will give birth to humans again no matter what. This was something that could not be violated. This was something that would inevitably happen. At most, the next batch of humans and this batch of humans would have some differences, but they would be the same in essence. They would be ugly, cruel, and bloodthirsty. Therefore, I want to use the entire human history that I have burned as fuel to help me return to the past, reshape the species that ruled this planet, and change everything from the root. This was the truth of the burning of human reason. Wuming snorted at this. Are you trying to say that you're great? Wuming had encountered quite a few of these self-righteous fellows. Shiro Amakusa, Shurjun was one of them. They only thought that humans needed to be saved and changed, so they began to act. They did not care about the sacrifices that would be made in the process, or how many people would be sacrificed. It could only be said that these people had good intentions, but their methods were wrong. No one could dictate the fate of others. Not humans, not gods, not Gidia, not Wuming. However, Wuming also knew that these people could not be changed with mere words. Only fists could stop them. As for how to change their minds, that was not something that Wuming could care about. In any case, Wuming was not prepared to let them live. Gidia had already grasped the black soil and obtained the power of the origin. Any existence with the black soil would view Wuming as a mortal enemy. Wuming did not know if Gidia could be saved in this situation. As such, there was only one answer left, and that was to completely kill them. At the same time, Gidia was thinking the same thing. This was because Gidia knew about the existence of the origin. Chapter 1041. Gidia was powerless to change all of this, which was why he wanted to burn human principles and use the energy obtained from burning human principles as a driving force to help Gidia return to the past and reshape humanity from its roots. Unexpectedly, Gidia obtained the black origin soil and also unexpectedly grasped the power of origin. If he could control the origin, it would be much more reliable than going back to the past to change humanity from its roots. In addition, the existence of the black origin soil would have an indelible hostility towards Wuming. So Gidia could take advantage of the situation to get rid of Wuming and replace him to take control of the origin. And Gidia also had the same idea. Therefore, after Gaia had obtained the power of origin, it did not allow the mantras to recover. Gaia still retained the energy of the mantras after being burned, because it wanted to use it as a weapon to destroy Wu Ming's weapon. Ha ha ha, great? That's my duty. I'm not great. Gaia laughed. I am the product of the collective consciousness of the 72 demon god pillars. I am the evil of humanity, standing on the opposite side of humanity. I am a number one beast, I who holds the principle of compassion. I am Gidia, who burns human principles. Demon god King Gidia? Behind Gidia's jade throne, the demon god pillars gradually wrapped around it. Countless demon god pillars first withered like dehydration, then intertwined like the roots of an old tree, and finally formed a huge sphere that slowly rose. In the middle of the sphere, a red light appeared. It was filled with a huge amount of magic power, and this magic power was accompanied by a lot of origin power. Seeing this, Wu Ming felt a little uneasy. My duty is to burn human principles and reshape humanity. Everything I do is for this planet, for the world, and you will also become my fuel to help me reach the origin and save all the worlds. Along with Gidia's bold words, the red light in the middle of the tree behind Gidia suddenly expanded, and a purple ray that was magnified several times erupted at Wu Ming. Sure, the sound of light shuttling between worlds was extremely ear-piercing. This light contained the power of origin, enough to destroy Wu Ming, and completely enveloped Wu Ming. Not long after, the light gradually weakened until it dissipated. The huge tree ball also entered a charging standby state. The ray that penetrated Wu Ming and shot into the distance also exploded, causing the entire world to shake. Many worlds were affected. In fact, a few transparent spheres that happened to be in the path of the light directly disappeared. At Wu Ming's original position, the spherical light film covered Wu Ming's body, preventing Wu Ming from suffering any damage. This was the defense created by Wu Ming's armor of debate, and it needed to be powered by origin energy, so the barrier was covered in origin energy. Only origin power could fight against origin power. This was the law. Therefore, Gidia was only standing at the same height as Wu Ming. However, Gidia's move was enough to surprise Wu Ming. Gaia's technique destroyed several transparent spheres of light, each of which was a world. Even ordinary humans had differences in strength. Even if Wu Ming and Gidia stood at the same height, there were still differences. Judging from the attack, just now, Gaia's offensive prowess had surpassed Wu Ming's. This guy can't be underestimated. Although Wu Ming didn't have the intention to underestimate Gidia, he was even more cautious now. However, Wu Ming didn't believe that Gidia's attack didn't have any limitations. That was the energy produced by the humanity that you burned, right? And since it was energy, there would be a time when it would be exhausted. One had to know that humanity only lasted for a few thousand years and wasn't endless. I don't have nearly endless magic power like you. Only by using the ashes of humanity that I'm going to use as fuel can I be confident in killing you. Even Omega's King Solomon didn't have endless magic power, so it was even more impossible for Gidia to have it. That was why he needed to use the energy obtained from burning humanity as fuel to fight against Wu Ming, who had nearly unlimited magic power. I have to say, Gidia, you are the strongest enemy I've ever faced. Wu Ming had encountered many powerful enemies, and they also had existences that could kill Wu Ming. However, they couldn't kill Wu Ming as easily as Gidia because they didn't have the origin power. Gidia, on the other hand, had the origin power and the origin black mud that countered Wu Ming. He could easily eliminate Wu Ming, provided that his attack hit its target. My dream was achieved by stepping on the corpse of your origin dragon. Accept your fate. 1. The huge tree ball behind Gidia was fully charged. The red light appeared once again and began to gather a huge amount of magic power with the origin power. It was obvious that Gidia was going to use the same move again. However, Wu Ming wouldn't give him another chance. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you curses. Evil people can't hit me. With the origin, power, Wu Ming's figure suddenly disappeared and instantly appeared in front of Gidia. In the next second, a pure white dragon claw reached out and slashed at Gidia with unstoppable force. Indeed, Gidia had the origin, power, and could easily kill Wu Ming. On the other hand, Wu Ming, who also had the origin power, could easily kill Gidia. It was like both sides had max attack power, but only 1 HP. The moment one's killing move hit the other, victory would be decided instantly. However, Gidia's attack range was too large. Once Wu Ming got close to Gidia, his attack would be restricted. After all, Gidia couldn't possibly fit himself into the purple light cannon's attack range. Gidia didn't want to take him down with himself. Therefore, Wu Ming chose to get close. Wu Ming's dragon claw landed on the jade seat and immediately shattered it. Countless demon god pillars danced wildly and surrounded Wu Ming. As for Gaia, she flew to the side. Afterwards, Gidia gathered energy in his hands. The black mud mixed with tremendous magic power was shot out from Gidia's hands, shooting at the huge Wu Ming. Light immediately shone from Wu Ming's body. The huge origin dragon disappeared, replaced by Wu Ming's human form with the blade of salvation in hand. Wu Ming easily dodged Gidia's attack. Using the light produced by the dragon transformation as a cover, he continued to use the power of the phoenix to charge at Gidia. Swish! Gidia dodged in advance and slashed with the blade of salvation, only cutting off a corner of the burning branch above Gidia's head. Immediately, the broken branch that separated from Gidia's head was like a leaf that had been injected with sulfuric acid. It decayed and turned black until it shattered and disappeared. A large number of demon god pillars took advantage of the situation and surrounded Wu Ming, twisting in a spiral and forming huge pillars. And Wu Ming was entangled in these twisting huge pillars. However, in the next second, sword light suddenly appeared and the huge pillar was directly cut in the middle. Wu Ming's figure turned into a streak of light and reappeared in front of Gidia. Afterwards, before Gidia could react, he raised his blade. Pa! Chapter 1042. Wu Ming's divine blade of salvation slashed down, but it did not cut anything because Gidia caught the white blade with both hands and clamped Wu Ming's divine blade of salvation with both hands. Gidia maintained his posture of clamping Wu Ming's divine blade of salvation with both hands and spoke leisurely. Sure enough, you're the expert in close combat. What a joke. Wu Ming's skills from Skaha were not for playing with monkeys, but for killing enemies. Let's not talk about other things first. Even a sword master who only practiced one sword skill all year round could defeat a king who had led an army and had good martial arts skills. Gidia was Solomon's magic form. How could he beat Wu Ming in close combat? Wu Ming smiled at this. If you're not convinced, in an instant, Wu Ming held the divine blade of salvation with both hands and skillfully slid it out of Gidia's hands. Then accept your death obediently. The divine blade of salvation that slid out of Gidia's hands slashed down at Gidia from below. Shing! The black demon god's flesh pillar that blocked Gidia in time was cut in half. Gidia, on the other hand, retreated backward. In the next second, Gidia's humanoid cannon that he had long prepared was instantly launched. The purple ray once again engulfed Wu Ming's figure, who did not have time to activate the Phoenix incarnation. However, immediately after, the spirit of speech that contained the power of origin came out of the purple light pillar. I am the strongest and the one who holds all victory in my hands. Whether it's human or demon, I'm the one who defeats all enemies' hostility. I will defeat any enemy who stands in my way. Pop! Like a fish rushing out of the sea, a burly golden giant rushed out of the purple light pillar. The burly giant seemed to be corroded, and its body was full of holes and incomplete. However, Wu Ming, who was in the middle of the giant's shadow, was unharmed. The purple ray of the humanoid cannon dissipated, and the aftermath of the explosion still erupted somewhere between the worlds. Needless to say, a few worlds must have been destroyed this time. Wuming dispelled the giant incarnation and stood opposite Gidia, who was floating in the void not far away. Around them were squirming pillars of various colors with eyes. From Wuming's close attack on Gidia to Wuming's use of the giant avatar as a shield to escape the beam of the humanoid cannon, it only took a few seconds. The victory and defeat that had almost been decided was actually just a facade. However, in the end, Wuming still had the upper hand. After all, Wuming had cut off a corner of Gidia's head, while Gidia did not cause any injuries to Wuming. Origin Dragon, you are indeed very powerful, but you still haven't reached that height. It seemed that Gidia had not only obtained origin power from the Black Origin Mud, but also some information about the Origin Dragon. Even if I haven't reached that height, it's more than enough to deal with you. Wuming stretched his neck and brandished the divine blade of salvation. The previous fight with Gidia was actually a test. Wuming did not have many moves, except for close combat martial arts and the divine blade of salvation. Magic and magic were barely enough to resist Gidia's humanoid cannon, but other than that, Wuming still had 12 avatars. By seizing the authority of multiple gods and adapting to Wuming's own authority, the 12 avatars of the 12 Authority God's Killer were quite powerful. Each avatar of the authority was not weaker than the authority of the other god slayers, and it was considered a first-class move in other worlds. Now, not to mention using all 12 avatars at once. Using multiple avatars at once was a piece of cake for the current Wuming. This could be considered one of Wuming's trump cards. Gidia was obviously not as good as Wuming in close combat. The reason why he dared to attack Wuming even after knowing Wuming's identity and strength was entirely because of the Black Origin Mud and the Origin Power that Gidia had obtained from it. The test is over. Let's officially begin. Wuming raised the divine blade of salvation, and at the tip of the sword, the light of the sun shone in this cosmic-like world. Wuming was ready for a big wave. However, Gidia seemed to have a stroke and laugh for some reason. Ha! Ha ha ha! Ha 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 dash! Wuming ignored Gidia's laughter and instantly condensed a sun at the tip of the divine blade of salvation. However, at this moment, the demon god pillar beside Gidia wriggled, and then something was presented in front of Gidia by the demon god pillar as if it was presenting a treasure. It was a building wrapped in a transparent ball of light, and it was still snowing heavily inside, as if it was a Christmas crystal ball. However, Wuming recognized this thing. This was Chaldea, a human security organization located on a snowy mountain a few thousand meters above sea level. It was also where Gadat, Matthew, Roman, and Olga Marie were currently located. I see. Wuming directly dispersed the sun at the tip of the sword. When you transformed your jade throne into a small world and left the world of the type moon, did you bring Chaldea with you? Did Flawless help you locate it? After all, Chaldea was considered a singularity that was difficult to find after being burned by the Anthropocene. Gidia wouldn't be able to find it so easily, and the Origin Black Mud and Origin Power weren't omnipotent. That's right. It was the moment Flawless escaped from your seal. He sent me Chaldea's location, but there's something I need to say. Gidia took the Chaldea crystal ball with one hand. Long before you entered the Mesopotamia singularity, I'd already done this. In other words, whether it was Gadat and Wuming smoothly arriving in Mesopotamia or successfully solving the problem of the Mesopotamia singularity, it was all under Gidia's control. So, it seemed that the reason why Chaldea was able to reverse locate Gidia's lair was actually because of Gidia's instructions. At this moment, Wuming couldn't help but frown. Gidia taking this out now not only meant that he had been going easy on Wuming, but in a sense, he was also threatening Wuming. Because Gidia saw Wuming's concern. You really cherish these worlds. That's right. Wuming cherished the worlds between the worlds, or rather, he didn't want them to be hurt. The reason why Wuming fought in close combat and didn't give Gidia a chance to fire the light cannon was entirely because Wuming was afraid that Gidea's light cannon would affect other worlds. Wuming knew many people in many worlds, including many friends and family members. After Wuming saw that Gidea's humanoid cannon had the ability to destroy worlds, Wuming chose to fight in close combat with Gidea. Because Wuming didn't want these worlds to be destroyed, he didn't want his friends and family to be in danger. Moreover, although Wuming wasn't overly compassionate, and in a sense, Wuming was an evil person, even he didn't want to see the worlds with living creatures destroyed by Gidea's humanoid cannon. Whether it was the former or the latter, there were all reasons why Wuming wanted to stop Gidea from firing the humanoid cannon. Wuming was worried that Gidea would see through this, so he tried his best to hide his intention. He made the first move before Gidea fired the second humanoid cannon, which could be considered as an act of striking first to gain the upper hand. However, who would have thought that Wuming's intention would be seen through by Gidea? Chapter 1043. Are you trying to threaten me? Wuming went straight to the point. No matter what, Gaia was still a respectable figure. How could she do something so despicable as to threaten him? However, Gaia was kind enough to explain the situation. Why would I? I'm just telling you that Chaldea is under my protection. You don't have to worry about Chaldea being affected by our battle. Then Gidea put away Chaldea's crystal ball as if he was really thinking about Wuming. However, Wuming didn't relax at all. Firstly, Chaldea was still in Gidea's hands. What said just now was another kind of threat. Secondly, other than the worlds that Wuming was unfamiliar with, there were many worlds that Wuming cared about that were still in between. In other words, once Gidea's artificial cannon was activated, there was a chance that it would affect those worlds. And Gidea said this because he wanted to get information from Wuming. In short, Gidea's artificial cannon had to be stopped. Otherwise, he would have to take it all on and not let the aftermath of the artificial cannon affect those worlds. All evildoers, be afraid of my power. I am the strongest, and I hold all victory in my hands. I will deny the sky, deny the earth. Make a pact with me. Listen to my call, and obey my command. Thou hast violated the contract and brought evil to the world. Bestow the torrential flood upon me. Let out a dazzling radiance, and grant me divine power. Evildoers can't hit me. Wuming chanted the words of the 8 incarnations in one breath. Moreover, he condensed the 8 words into one sentence, forming a short version of each incarnation spirit. Although it sounded a little out of place, the effect wasn't bad at all. A huge dark purple draconic shadow appeared around Wuming. A huge white and pure black divine blade of salvation appeared in the hands of the huge draconic shadow. Black clouds appeared above the huge draconic shadow and kept spreading to the surroundings. In this cosmic-like place, there was a storm, lightning, and thunder, and the seawater had already surrounded the entire Temple of Time. This is a new world. Gidea was surprised. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the sea surged under Gidea's feet. There was no end to the clouds and no end to the sea. The storm with lightning and thunder fell suddenly, and the sea surged violently, crashing into the Temple of Time. Gidea could sense that his Temple of Time, and the demon god pillars had arrived in a new world. Without a doubt, this was a new world created by Wuming's spirit of speech. This way, we won't have to worry about affecting the worlds in between. As soon as Wuming's words reached Gidea's ears, Wuming appeared in front of Gidea with the divine blade of salvation in his hand. The huge sword shadow of the divine blade of salvation slashed down at Gidea. Clang! Gidea blocked the attack. Gidea crossed his hands and clenched them into fists, and the sword shadow of the divine blade of salvation slashed at his fists. Upon closer inspection, it wasn't the fist that blocked Wuming's attack, but the ring on Gidea's finger. Although Gidea was a 3-meter-tall humanoid creature, his body was very different from a human's body. For example, Gidea's hands were enough to crush several people's heads at once. The 10 rings on his thick hands looked like brass knuckles. However, no matter how much they looked like brass knuckles, they were still just rings. Crack! Sure enough, there was a crack in one of the rings. Gidia suddenly exerted force and pushed Wuming's body away. As for the cracked ring on Gaia's finger, it shattered in an instant. Wuming, who knew Roman's identity, easily guessed what the 10 rings on Gidia's finger were. The broken one is a fake, right? Wuming wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he slowly chatted with Gidia. Gidia, who was suddenly attacked, wasn't angry. He followed Wuming's words and replied, "My king had 10 rings, but he only left 9 rings. One of them was missing, so I made one myself." The king that Gidia mentioned was King Solomon. As for the fake ring that Gaia had created, it was the one that had shattered earlier. But that's not important. We don't need a king anymore. I'm our king. In an instant, the man-made cannon that was already prepared at the back of the Jade Throne was launched, and the target was Wuming. However, Wuming didn't dodge this time, because if he did, this temporary world that was hard to form would be destroyed by the cannon. Boom! Whoosh! 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 Thunder rumbled, lightning flashed, thunder rumbled, waves surged, wind howled, thunder, rain, and waves rushed toward the cannon that was fired at Wuming as if they were alive. The moment they came into contact, the thunder, rain, and waves were dyed with a layer of black, destructive power. The two collided in an instant. A huge explosion occurred in this world. White light illuminated this world that only had sea and storm. Wuming had returned to the root without anyone noticing. On the central platform, Wuming landed in his human form. "Lord Wuming, why are you back?" After listening to Tiamat's explanation, Enkidu, who was still enjoying the pillow on his lap, instantly got up and came to Wuming's side. Tiamat didn't stop him. Instead, she sat aside obediently and didn't disturb him. "There's a problem. I had my clone stall Gidia for a while." That's right. The clone that was fighting Gidia was Wuming's full strength. At that time, Wuming had used the simple spiritual language formed by the 8 clones: Dragon Seed, Giant, Storm, Annihilation, Flood, Thunder God, Phoenix, and Dependence. The ability of the Dependence clone was that when a clone was created, the clone would inherit 100% of the original strength. In other words, the clone could still use the 12 powers. Wuming had also given the Divine Blade of Salvation to the clone. The Divine Blade of Salvation, which couldn't be duplicated, could be considered as a cover for the clone. The Thunder God clone, the Storm clone, the Storm clone, and the Flood clone, combined with the power of the root, formed a simple and crude world. After that, Wuming used the Phoenix to escape from this world. At the same time, he had the clone use the Phoenix clone to ambush Gidia. Even Gidia wouldn't be able to tell that it was a clone that was fighting it. The reason Wuming didn't fight Gidia was mainly because it wasn't easy. Gaia not only hijacked Chaldea, but its artificial cannons can also destroy the worlds between the worlds at any time and anywhere. Victory or defeat aside, there would be heavy casualties in the end. That was why Wu Ming had his doppelganger fight Gaia for the time being, delaying as much as possible. That was why his doppelganger and Gaia had talked about the ring. Unfortunately, Gaia did not give the clones a chance to chat. After chatting for a while, she once again launched a sneak attack on Silent's clones with the human logic cannon, and the battle began again. As for why Wuming wanted to return to the root, it was naturally to solve the current situation that was getting worse. Chapter 1044. Gidia had the humanoid cannon, and with its origin power, it could destroy any world in between with a single shot. Not only that, but it also had Chaldea as a hostage. If Wuming fought with Gidia for real, Wuming would definitely have some reservations. Therefore, Wuming returned to the Origin and prepared to explore the secret of the Origin Dragon's adulthood. Only by reaching that height would Wuming be able to effortlessly deal with Gidia, save Chaldea, and protect the various worlds. At that time, Wuming might also find a way to restore the worlds destroyed by Gidia's humanoid cannon. But how would Wuming find out the secret of adulthood? As mentioned before, it would take time since he had no clue. But now, Wuming had a clue, which was why he escaped and returned to the Origin. Gidia was injured by the black Origin mud and obtained Origin power from it. Wuming looked at Enkidu and suddenly said, "So, I want to give it a try." As soon as he said that, Enkidu was shocked and his expression changed. Lord Wuming. Enkidu had been by Wuming's side for a long time, so he basically knew all of Wuming's secrets. There was not much that he did not know. Therefore, Enkidu knew very well how harmful the Black Origin mud was to Wuming. Most importantly, almost all of the Black Origin mud that wandered between worlds had been used by Gidia as bombs. There were so many of them that their power was unimaginable. Otherwise, Wuming would not have chosen to leave his body and transfer his consciousness to the backup machine. Since the Black Origin mud between worlds had been summoned by Gidia and caused an explosion, there was no more Black Origin mud between worlds. Only some worlds still had Black Origin mud. After wandering around for a long time, the Origin Black mud accidentally entered these worlds. Wuming had encountered Black Origin soil in quite a few worlds. The main body of Erica that Darius used was Pandora's box, which contained the Origin Black soil. When Wuming was fighting against the last king, Roman, in the Godslayer world, he had accidentally shattered the world barrier. If he had not stopped in time, the Origin Black soil surrounding the Godslayer world might have entered the Godslayer world. The Black Origin soil also existed in the Star Cup, and it had even given the Star Cup its own consciousness. The Origin Black mud had once existed in the root of the Origin, and had almost stolen Wuming's home after Wuming's return. Although the Origin Black mud in the Box Court world was brought in by Wuming, it had also affected that world, and Azedakaha had changed a lot because of it. In the Mesopotamia Singularity, Tiamat had also fused with the Origin Black mud for some reason. Her authority, the Sea of Life, had also fused with the Origin Black mud, and Tiamat had also become extremely strange and powerful. However, after all that had been said, one thing was very clear, and that was that the Origin Black mud had all been eliminated. There was very little Black Origin mud in Pandora's box, and after being sealed for so many years, it had weakened. After fusing with Wuming, it had luckily been eliminated by the immature Wuming. The Origin Black mud that had almost entered the Godslayer world must have been eliminated in the explosion caused by Gidia. The Origin Black mud in the Star Cup had fused with the Star Cup's consciousness and was finally eliminated by Wuming. The Origin Black mud in the Big Origin had also been eliminated by Wuming using the power of the Big Origin. In the Box Court world, the Origin Black mud had entered Azedakaha's body and was eliminated by Wuming in the end. Even Azedakaha's soul had perished, and his body had been transformed into an absolute evil spirit base by Wuming. As for Tiamat, Wuming had also used the Void Star Tai Sui seal on Azedakaha's body to bring her to the Big Origin to be purified. In the end, Wuming even had a mother. In any case, all of this meant that the Origin Black mud that Wuming had encountered or known about had all been eliminated, and not a trace was left. There was no Origin Black mud between worlds. Only in some worlds, there might be some Origin Black mud mixed in, but Wuming did not have the time to look for it. Therefore, Enkidu's meaning was very clear. Not to mention the secret of using the Origin Black mud to trigger adulthood. There was not even a shadow of the Origin Black mud. But in the next second, Wuming took out a ball of Origin Black mud. The ball of Origin Black mud, which had shrunk into a ball, appeared in Wuming's hand as if it was afraid. It was as smooth and round as a black jade ball, and those who did not know would have thought it was a precious jade. Lord Wuming, where did you get this? Enkidu looked at Wuming in confusion and surprise. Kalas answered Enkidu. When Master was fighting with Gaia, he took the opportunity to take some. That's right. When Wuming destroyed Gidia's jade throne, Gidia used the Origin Black mud to attack Wuming when he dodged, and Wuming grabbed a handful at that time. In fact, when Wuming first heard that Gidia obtained his power from the Origin Black mud, he had planned to get some Origin Black mud from Gidia for research. After all, who knew if Wuming would destroy Gidia in the end? To be safe, Wuming collected some Origin Black mud in advance and planned to test it out after killing Gidia. However, who would have thought that Gidia would add the threat of holding Chaldea hostage to the threat of the Anthropocene canon? With no other choice, Wu-ming, who changed his tactics at the last minute, chose to escape and let his doppelganger deal with Gidia, while Wu-ming brought the Origin Black Mud back to the Origin to try and see if he could obtain the secret of coming of age. This idea was a little uncertain, but Wu-ming was uncertain. As an old gambler, Wu-ming was also gambling. Wu-ming was not sure if the Origin Black Mud could help Wu-ming obtain the secret of coming of age, so Wu-ming gambled on the good side and came back to try. Wu-ming had also been severely injured by the Origin Black Mud together with Gidia, but Wu-ming managed to separate his mind from his body in time and went to the backup machine, so he did not know if the Origin Black Mud had any effect on Wu-ming's growth. However, the reason why Wu-ming's body grew so quickly was probably not entirely because he stayed in the box garden world for a long time. The passage of time could indeed have an effect on the growth of the Origin Dragon, but the number of years needed was astronomical. Therefore, it was very likely that the Origin Black Mud did have a promoting effect on Wu-ming's growth. It was a pity that Wu-ming had shifted his mind back then and did not experience the secrets brought by the Origin Black Mud, nor did he know the changes the Origin Black Mud had on Wu-ming's body. Thinking about it carefully, Wu-ming increasingly felt that the reason he was approaching the level of coming of age so quickly was very likely because he was severely injured by the Origin Black Mud back then. Now, Wu-ming did not know whether to laugh or cry. If Wu-ming's mind had not shifted to the backup machine back then, he might have beaten Gidia up by now. However, Wu-ming didn't regret it. After all, if the events of a certain time in the past were changed, then everything that Wu-ming experienced in the future would probably be completely different. Wu-ming cherished all the people and things that he had encountered so far. So regret? That was impossible. Although the Origin Black Mud was indeed terrifying to Wu-ming, when he thought about the people and things that he had encountered so far, Wu-ming suddenly felt that the Origin Black Mud was actually not that scary. Looking at the Origin Black Mud floating in his hand, Wu-ming immediately made up his mind. Chapter 1045. Suddenly, Wu-ming pressed the black Origin soil against his heart. Thump! Thump! In an instant, Wu-ming's heart let out a clear sound that spread throughout the entire route. Then, Wu-ming showed a pained expression. Lord Wu-ming, Enkidu was so scared that he quickly held Wu-ming. Lil-en, I'm fine. Wu-ming's pained expression eased a little, and he no longer seemed to be in so much pain. However, this was only because Wu-ming didn't want Enki to worry. He forced himself to relax his furrowed brows because of the pain. In fact, the pain coming from his heart was too much for Wu-ming to bear. Why is it so painful? Wu-ming wailed his heart. This was not much less painful than when Wu-ming was blown up by the explosion caused by Gidia detonating the black Origin soil. Back then, Wu-ming had instantly transferred his consciousness out of his body, so he did not suffer much damage. But this time, Wu-ming could be said to be enduring pain that was comparable to that time. This was double the pain of his soul and body. It cannot be helped. The black Origin soil had a restraining effect on Wu-ming, and it was much more painful than a sword piercing his body. Streams of black Origin soil flowed from Wu-ming's heart to the platform like water droplets falling on a red-hot iron plate. The black Origin soil that fell on the platform instantly evaporated. This was the manifestation of the black Origin soil being eliminated by the root's defense mechanism. As long as the black Origin soil left Wu-ming's body, it would be eliminated by the root's defense mechanism. At this moment, Wu-ming's hand was still pressed against his heart to prevent more black Origin soil from flowing out and being wasted. Wu-ming had to slowly wait for the black Origin soil to completely enter his body. However, the pain was unbearable. Wu-ming's brows, which he had forced to relax in order to not worry Enkidu, were now tightly knitted again, but the process was rather slow. Lil, and you, and Kala stay away from me. Wu-ming used his free hand to take off Kala's from his head and threw her into Enkidu's hands. Then he shook off Enkidu's support, turned around, and walked a few steps to put some distance between him and Enkidu. After turning around, his brows furrowed brows instantly, and his facial expression began to distort. It was clear how painful it was. Lord Wuming, Master, both Enkidu and Colossus even wanted to catch up to Wuming's Esco. They knew that Wuming didn't want them to worry and also didn't want them to be affected by the accident that might happen later. That was why Wuming told Enkidu and Colossus to stay away from him. However, Enkidu and Colossus wouldn't want to stay away from Wuming because of something like this. However, in the next second, a hand landed on Enkidu's shoulder. Enkidu, who was holding Colossus's head, was stunned and immediately turned around. It was Tiamat. Tiamat, who was originally sitting in a daze, stood up and walked behind Enkidu. When she saw Enkidu turn around to look at her, Tiamat let go of Enkidu's shoulder, then walked with her slender legs and slowly walked toward Wuming, who had his back facing them. "Child, son." Tiamat walked behind Wuming and slowly spoke. Although Tiamat still stuttered when she spoke, Tiamat had a beautiful voice. Her voice was extremely beautiful. When Wuming heard it, his furrowed brows relaxed a little. The pain only eased a little, and he didn't feel any change. Therefore, Wuming was still in pain. However, in the next second, the stumbling Wuming clearly felt someone pulling him. In an instant, Wuming fell backward and was embraced by a warm embrace. Tiamat hugged Wuming, who was sitting on the ground, like a mother hugging her child. Wuming, who was leaning back in the embrace, could even clearly feel the elasticity of the two firm balls on his back. But at this moment, Wuming didn't feel anything else in his heart. There was only warmth, as comfortable as being in a mother's embrace. Ever since he could remember, Wuming only had the love of his grandfather. There was no fatherly or motherly love. Even so, Wuming could still feel from Tiamat's embrace that this was indeed a motherly love that Wuming had never felt before. Therefore, Wuming was quite infatuated with this rare motherly love. As a result, Wuming slowly adapted to the pain caused by the black root mud eroding his body from his heart. In other words, Wuming's attention shifted from the pain to the motherly love to ease the pain until he completely ignored the pain. However, Wuming's purpose was not to eliminate the pain, but to try to find the secret of adulthood when the black root mud caused damage to the body. Therefore, we must be awake. Tiamat seemed to really treat Wuming as her own son who needed to be treated wholeheartedly. She even began to help Wuming achieve his goal. Tiamat, who was half kneeling behind Wuming, hugged Wuming tightly. She rested her chin on Wuming's head. Her pink starry eyes were filled with longing and love for Wuming. She opened her small mouth full of sharp teeth and slowly sang a song. This simple song was exactly the same as Tiamat's cry when she was at the Mesopotamian Singularity. However, it was different from the aggressive song from before. This time, the song contained the great love of a mother and was not aggressive at all. Wuming, who heard this song, felt as if he had been fed a hangover soup. Wuming, who was still indulging in motherly love, became extremely clear-headed at this moment. He also understood that Tiamat was helping him. First, she used her motherly love to remove the pain caused by the erosion of the black root mud. Then, she used her song to wake Wuming up at this moment. In this way, Wuming could concentrate on his research and explore his goal. Wuming's eyes were clear as he looked at Tiamat's slender arms that reached out from his shoulders and wrapped around his neck. He smiled. It seems that this mother is set on. Tiamat's behavior made Wuming's impression of Tiamat rise to the maximum. Previously, Wuming was still considering whether to deny Tiamat as his mother, but now it was confirmed. After that, Wuming closed his eyes. He had to hurry up and see if he made the right bet. Wuming focused his consciousness on his body and saw the inside of his body. The black substance was spreading little by little from his heart to all parts of his body. The black substance was the black root mud that entered Wuming's body. Wuming's hand that was originally pressed on his heart had already been put down, because the black root mud knew that once it left his body, it would be eliminated. Therefore, it entered Wuming's body through his heart and spread at a speed visible to the naked eye, eroding Wuming's body. At this rate, Wuming's entire body would be occupied by the black root mud in a few minutes. Once the black root mud completely occupied Wuming's body, who knew what would happen? Wuming was willing to gamble because he had insurance. He would not put himself in mortal danger in the gamble. In the next second, a large amount of white substance appeared out of thin air in Wuming's body and began to fight against the black substance. This white substance was the origin power. Chapter 1046. Any part of Wuming's body could produce origin power, which was why it could appear out of thin air inside Wuming's body and fight against the black substance that represented the origin black mud. Origin power was Wuming's insurance. Wuming consciously controlled the birth and death of origin power, constantly mixing it with the origin black mud. The white substance and the black substance were like two countries at war, going back and forth, one taking over one side, the other taking over the other. In the end, the origin black mud and origin power each took over half of Wuming's body. It wasn't a case of you taking up the left and me taking up the right, or you taking up the top and me taking up the bottom. Instead, it was a mixture of you and me. At this moment, Wuming's body was filled with black and white substances. Black and white were constantly changing, and finally, the origin black mud and origin power were fighting against each other. However, this wasn't enough. The origin black mud wasn't in its home ground, and it was caught off guard by the origin power. All of its thoughts were focused on resisting the origin power. As a result, the corrosion of the origin black mud on Wuming's body weakened. He hadn't obtained anything from the corrosion earlier, and now that the corrosion had weakened, wouldn't it be even harder to obtain the secret? And so, Wuming came up with an idea. Wuming controlled the origin power and consciously guided the origin black mud through his body again and again. In just a few breaths' time, the origin black mud had completely covered Wuming's body, leaving nothing behind. However, what Wuming imagined didn't happen. Not only that, nothing happened at all. Nothing happened. Wuming was at a loss. Could it be that his gamble was wrong? Refusing to believe it, Wuming once again controlled the origin black mud to flow through his body, but the result was still fruitless. This is troublesome. Wuming felt a bit irritated. Wuming's goal was not to find the secret of adulthood and become stronger, but to kill Gidia, protect the world between worlds, and protect Chaldea. However, this method did not seem to achieve the goal of killing Gidia, protecting the various worlds and Chaldea. That was why Wuming was frustrated. It seemed that Wuming had made a wrong bet this time. In that case, Wuming needed to think of other ways to get through this difficult situation. After all, not only did he want to protect the worlds in between from harm, but he also wanted to take back Chaldea from Gidia, and he also had to kill Gidia. The difficulty of combining the three into one was extraordinarily high. Looks like I have to work on that first. No matter what, they had to destroy the launcher of the anthropoid cannon first. This was the most important thing. Only in this way could the worlds in between be safe and sound. Then he had to deal a heavy blow to Gidia, take back Chaldea from Gidia, and then completely destroy Gidia. This needed to be done in one go, and the difficulty was not ordinary. After all, Wuming did not know how fast the launcher of the man-made cannons, which were the clusters of trees that looked like withered branches, could recover. He also did not know if Gidia's launcher was the only one that could release the man-made cannons. Wuming also did not know where Gidia hid Chaldea. Even more, Wuming did not know if Gidia had any trump cards. In short, this was not an easy task. However, just as Wuming was thinking, he did not notice that the black origin mud was slowly assimilating with the origin power in Wuming's body. The pain that he had adapted to gradually disappeared. Wuming, who was unaware of all this, left Tiamat's embrace and turned to look at Tiamat. Tiamat did not know why Wuming wanted to leave her embrace, but Tiamat did not need to know. She just looked at Wuming silently, her starry eyes filled with motherly love for Wuming. Seeing Tiamat like this, Wuming did not know what to say for a moment. The words of gratitude that he wanted to express were also stuck in his mouth. Tiamat completely treated Wuming as her son, but Wuming was not used to treating Tiamat as his mother. Tiamat helped him just now, so he should naturally thank Tiamat. However, Wuming felt that once he opened his mouth, Tiamat would become unhappy. After all, parents who truly love their children did not ask for anything in return. Wuming was worried that Tiamat would think that Wuming was treating her as an outsider and feel sad. Anyway, Wuming was quite conflicted now. Looking at Tiamat's pink starry eyes, Wuming finally decided to thank her. However, before Wuming could finish his sentence, Tiamat seemed to have seen through Wuming's intentions. She happily hugged Wuming in her arms and kept muttering, Child! Child! Tiamat's expression at the moment looked quite happy, and Wuming was currently buried in Tiamat's bosom, which was filled with motherly love, so he could not speak for a while. After exerting a tremendous amount of effort, Wuming finally left Tiamat's embrace. After persuading Tiamat in every possible way, he made Tiamat obediently sit on the side, and then Wuming walked towards Enkidu. I made the wrong bet. I have to find another way to deal with Gydia. Wuming told Enkidu and Kalis about what he had just experienced. At the same time, Wuming also told the two of them about his plan to remedy the situation. Master, is it okay for that thing to stay in your body? Kalis was referring to the black origin soil in Wuming's body. I can't get rid of it for a while, but with the protection of the origin energy, the black origin soil can't do anything else. After all, it had already penetrated deep into Wuming's body and could not be instantly removed by the origin energy. However, it was not difficult to completely remove it, but it was not something that could be completely removed in a short period of time. After all, with the origin energy, it would not affect Wuming much for a while, and the pain from the black origin soil was almost gone. Therefore, Wuming decided to deal with the black origin soil in his body after he successfully killed Gydia and took back Chaldea. Next, he would need the help of Enkidu and Kalis to deal with Gydia. He would use all the power he could to severely injure Gydia and take back Chaldea from Gydia. Use my power as you wish, Master Wuming. After Enkidu finished speaking, he turned into a golden chain and wrapped around Wuming's arm, leaving Kalis floating in the air. Although I don't have the ability to attack directly, I will stay by your side and assist you, Master. Kalis flew directly onto Wuming's head and settled down. Then, Wuming looked at Tiamat, who was sitting obediently not far away. After Tiamat returned his gaze, Wuming also calmed down. Wuming transformed into a huge origin dragon, rushed into the void, and disappeared. Chapter 10:47. The world that was formed by a few clones was destroyed by Gydia. This was something that could not be helped. Putting aside the fact that Gydia's humanoid cannon had the power to destroy an entire world with the support of his origin energy, the world that Wuming's clones created was just a very simple world. Apart from the storm and the ocean, there was nothing else. There was not even land. Even if Silent's doppelganger tried his best to stop Gaia's anthropoid cannon, even if it was just the aftershocks after a few rounds, this simple world would not collapse because of the aftershocks. On the other hand, Gydia's time temple was still intact apart from the Jade Throne that Wuming smashed with his claw. After all, the Temple of Time was King Solomon's second noble artifact. Later on, it was obtained by Gaia. Now it was tempered, modified, and strengthened by the power of origin. It would be difficult to destroy it completely. At the very least, if Gaia's artificial cannons wanted to destroy the Temple of Time, they would have to hit it at least 3 times. This was enough to prove how powerful the Time Temple was. Gydia, who had returned to the world, flew to the ruins of the Jade Throne and sat on a fragment, as if the Jade Throne was not destroyed. Interesting, very interesting. I didn't expect you to be able to create a world. Gydia praised Wuming. No matter how simple a world was, it was still a world. As long as it was completed in the future, it might be possible to form a world that operated on its own. Facing Gydia's praise, Wuming's clones continued to pretend to be his original body. I've studied the inherent barrier. With my own ability, It's not difficult for me to create such a simple world. Wu Ming's clones were right. Wu Ming had been studying the inherent barrier since the beginning. The inherent barrier itself was a world that could exist on its own, but required mana to maintain. Wu Ming's clones were originally God's powers. With this knowledge, it was not difficult for Wu Ming to create a simple world on his own. However, it was Wu Ming's first time using the inherent barrier to create a world. Compared to Gidea, Wu Ming was showing off in front of an expert. After all, Gaia's noble phantasm, or rather, the second noble phantasm that originally belonged to Solomon, the time to where the crown has come to inspire all things as Paulina, which was the temple of time, was actually an inherent enchantment. It was a space that gathered and integrated the history of mankind that had been converted into mana. It existed in an imaginary space that was isolated from the usual flow of time. It was originally an inherent barrier, but it later became a singularity. Later on, due to the origin, power, and Gidea's control of the relic, it became a special small world. If Gidea wanted to, the Time Temple could undoubtedly become a new world. However, Gidea did not want to do that. That was why he kept the Time Temple in its current state, leaving the moon-shaped world and coming to this world. Therefore, in a sense, Wu Ming was showing off in front of an expert. "You're really strong, Gidea." Gidea chose the right battlefield and grasped Wu Ming's weakness. So Wu Ming did not dare to fight with all his strength against Gidea. It could be said that he had all the right time, place, and people. Gidea had the artificial cannon that could easily destroy the world, and the battlefield between Wu Ming and Gidea was still between countless worlds. In addition, Wu Ming was also threatened by Gidea to some extent, so he could not fight with Gidea at all. If one were to simply compare Wu Ming and Gidea, Wu Ming's individual combatability was very strong, while Gidea's was good at AoE damage. In short, all the factors added together were quite unfavorable to Wu Ming. However, it was good that Gidea's moves were simple and did not have any strange abilities. Wu Ming could still deal with it, but if he wanted to defeat Gidea under such conditions, he still had to plan for the long term. In other words, he had to stall for time. Everything Wu Ming was doing now was to stall for time. Whether it was building the world, chatting with Gidea, or stopping Gidea for releasing the artificial cannon, they were all stalling for time. In order to avoid being too deliberate, Wu Ming also took the initiative to attack, but those were all harmless attacks that basically did not have any effect on Gidea. However, in the end, he still did not find any good way and could only rely on force to break through. Wu Ming's clone had received the plan of the main body, and the main body was also rushing here. What Wu Ming's clone needed to do was to cover for the next plan and make the best preparations. First, he needed to destroy Gidea's launcher that launched the artificial cannon, the huge sphere made of dead branches. Glancing at the sphere from the corner of his eye, Wu Ming's clone let go of the blade of salvation and let it float in the dragon-shaped phantasm around him. Then, Wu Ming's doppelganger raised a hand and chanted, "For victory, come to me quickly. Immortal son, please give me a shining steed. O spirited horse, with the lifeline of my origin dragon, I bestow upon the eternal glory. Bring forth my radiant wheel of light." Wu Ming's clone suddenly emitted light. In this universe-like world, it was like a sun. This was an enhanced version of the spirit that could double the power of the sun incarnation. A star appeared in front of Gidea. The light made Gidea unable to open his eyes for a while, although Wu Ming's clone did not know whether Gidea had eyes or not. The next second, the star rushed to Gidea. "What?" Gaia stood up from the jade throne fragment in the face of the star that was rushing towards her. She looked surprised. The reason was very simple. Regardless of whether Gidea was threatening him or not, Chaldea was on Gidea's side. If Gidea did not protect Chaldea, Chaldea would definitely be destroyed under the impact of this star. Did the other party not care about Chaldea's safety? Just as Gidea mobilized the demon god pillar and prepared to defend, the huge star suddenly flickered and disappeared. No, it didn't disappear. Gaia could feel that her back was burning hot at the moment. And the star did not disappear, but moved so fast that it teleported. The incarnations on Wu Ming's clone had not been removed. The phoenix incarnation was still there, but the burden on the body was not small. Wu Ming's clone used the sun incarnation. It seemed to be rushing to Gidia, but in fact it was aiming at the reloaded anthropoid cannon behind Gidia. The star came into contact with the launcher of the anthropoid cannon, and the next second, thunder, hurricane, vortex, and undercurrent full of destruction all exploded in the star. And in this way, the whole star that was originally stable exploded. Chapter 1048. Wu Ming's clone used his various avatars as ammunition to detonate the sun avatar, using it as a bomb to explode behind Gidia. He wanted to destroy the artificial cannon's launcher, which was the cluster of branches. Without a doubt, Wu Ming's clone succeeded. After the violent explosion, the smoke and dust dispersed. Gidia had already been protected by the demon god pillars, preventing him from being affected by the explosion. Although it was an attack aimed at the artificial cannon's launcher, it also contained the power of the source. The aftermath was enough to make Gidia suffer, so he had to be on guard. Because the explosion had ended, only a few demon god pillars remained. The barrier dissipated, and Gidia's figure reappeared. Because it was just too powerful, and with the suppression of the power of the source, the demon god pillars did not have the time to split and grow. Just then, all the demon god pillars stood in front of Gidia, but even so, only a few demon god pillars remained. However, the demon god pillars successfully protected Gidia, not letting Gidia suffer any damage. And as long as there was a demon god pillar, and as long as Gidia existed, the 72 demon god pillars would regenerate. However, the few fragments left behind by the Jade Throne had basically all shattered. As for Wu Ming's clone's target, the artificial cannon's launcher, it had disappeared. In Gidia's senses, the artificial cannon's launcher had been destroyed by Wu Ming in the explosion of the star just now. That's self-destruction, right? The explosion of the star just now was without a doubt self-destruction. Otherwise, how could it be so powerful? If Wu Ming really had such a powerful move, he could have used it right from the start. Why would he waste so much time with Gidia? However, why would he self-destruct? Even Gidia did not expect Wu Ming to choose to self-destruct. After all, no matter who stood in Wu Ming's perspective, no one would do that, right? After all, Gidia's goal was to kill Wu Ming. His self-destruction was what Gidia wanted, but Wu Ming should have aimed at Gidia before self-destructing. Also, was Wu Ming going to die just like that? That was too ridiculous. Even Gidia would not believe it. Then what was going on? Just as Gidia was thinking, a meteor streaked across the cosmos like sky between worlds. The meteor's target was Gidia. When a meteor was still a long distance away from Gaia, Gaia discovered the meteor's tracks. After all, it was too strange for a meteor to appear at this time. Was this Wu Ming's trump card? However, the star that Wu Ming had just created had indeed self-destructed. Gidia could clearly sense Wu Ming's aura disappearing bit by bit. Is this a unique phenomenon between worlds? Gidia decided to observe for now. However, just as Gidia was thinking, the meteor arrived before Gidia in an instant. It was not a meteor. It was Wu Ming in his huge dragon form. Roar! Wu Ming roared furiously and swiped at Gidia with his claws imbued with the power of origin. Because the demon god pillars had not fully recovered, a few demon god pillars could not block the claw imbued with the power of origin. Rip! Immediately, the demon god pillars were severed and Gidia was sent flying. Wu Ming's figure stopped where Gidia was originally. With a swipe of his claws, he shattered the demon god pillars that had been severed into pieces and disappeared. He had to destroy all of the demon god pillars while there were only a few left. The demon god pillars' recovery speed was suppressed by the power of origin. Now, Gidia did not have a single demon god pillar that he could use, and Gidia was finally injured by Wu Ming. Gaia, who had been sent flying, steadied herself and touched her chest. An extremely exaggerated wound stretched from Gidia's shoulder to his waist. A piercing pain surged into Gidia's head. Before Wuming's claws reached Gidia, the remaining demon god pillars protected Gidia, allowing Gidia to avoid Wuming's direct attack. As a result, this wound was not caused by Wuming's claws, but by the power of origin imbued within Wuming's claws, or in other words, by grazing Gidia. Otherwise, Gaia wouldn't only have one wound on her body. A blue figure appeared from the hole in Gidia's chest. It was the crystal ball that stored Chaldea's base. As Gidia touched the wound, the Chaldea's crystal ball fused into Gidia's body again. Clearly, Gidia had hidden Chaldea even deeper in his body. The sharp-eyed Wuming obviously saw this. So was there. Now, all the demon god pillars had been destroyed, and the artificial cannon's launcher had been destroyed. Chaldea's location had also been found. Now, as long as he took Chaldea back, Gidia would lose everything he relied on. And Wuming had discovered a new move. With a wave of Wuming's dragon claw, a dozen meteors flew towards Gidia. At a closer look, those were not meteors at all. They were clearly Wuming. Or in other words, they were Wuming's clones. And these clones were not as strong as Wuming. They were even much weaker than Wuming. So, even if there were more of them, Gidia was not afraid. At the same time, he also knew why that Wuming had self-destructed so easily. Because that was also a clone, just like the soundless creatures that were flying towards it. Mere clones. Gidia clasped his hands together and opened them again. Countless origin black mud spurted out from Gidia's palms like lasers. In an instant, a few Wuming's clones were hit. However, there were also clones that survived. These clones took the opportunity to approach Gidia. Immediately, the surroundings emitted a star-like light. Could it be? Gidia realized something. In the next second, several stars surrounded Gidia and exploded. This was Wuming's new move. Using the clones as bombs, he used the sun incarnation with all his strength. With the power of self-destruction, he attacked Gidia. Such a disgusting move was simply Wuming's signature move. It was a pity that Wuming had not discovered this point before. Art was explosions. Sure enough, each of the 12 clones was useful. It was just a matter of whether they knew how to use it or not. After the explosion, Gidia flew out from the smoke that had not yet dissipated. His face was full of anger. Perhaps he was disgusted by Wuming's move. Aren't you afraid of hurting Chaldea? Gidia was right. The explosion of Wuming's clones was not that powerful, but it was not small either. It was almost comparable to the gas explosion in Winterwood City. Even if Chaldea was in Gidia's body, if he really destroyed Chaldea, it would not be a joke. However, Wuming smiled at Gidia. The explosion caused by self-destruction is almost all the power of the source. How could it hurt Chaldea? That's right. Whether it was the sun incarnation or the other clones, or Wuming's sun incarnation, they were all driven by the purest power of the source. From a human's point of view, these explosions were very ordinary. They could not hurt Chaldea's defense at all. But for Gidia, who had the black soil, it would definitely cause double the damage. When Wuming slapped Gidia away with his claw, he clearly saw that Gidia was injured, while Chaldea's crystal ball was fine. Obviously, as long as he attacked with pure source power, he would not hurt Chaldea. Reducing the power of the explosion and increasing the concentration of source power would not affect Chaldea much. This was the effective method Wuming accidentally found to deal with Gidia. Chapter 1049. You deserve to be called my enemy. Gidia was not angry that Wuming had found such a shameless way. Instead, he praised him. So, you should just accept your death, Gidia. Wuming's body was glowing. Its gigantic dragon body instantly disintegrated and turned into countless clones of Wuming. Each of the clones knew how to use the sun and charged towards Gidia. I think you're mistaken about something. In response, Gaia snorted with a smile. Even if my third relic doesn't have a launcher, it can still be activated. Gidia's muscles tensed up and a large amount of energy gathered in the muzzle-like gap on its chest. The time of birth has come. I'll use this to correct nature. Gidia crossed his arms and suddenly opened them. Our Salmadal Salamones. Boom! Countless rays of light appeared from Gidea's chest and gathered into purple energy rays. Each ray of light was comparable to the heat of the star Holy Sword. The energy rays that were gathered by countless rays of light were full of deterrence. The imaginary number 1 relic created by Gaia, Ars Nova, would collect the energy obtained from burning human history and convert it into an attack before launching out. This attack was the creation of Gaia's third noble artifact. It was used to correct all things, Ars Almadel Salamones, which was also known as the humanistic canon. The so-called launcher was just a dispensable tool. To Gaia, even if it did not have a launcher as a relic that it had mastered, it could still retract and release it as it pleased. The third relic penetrated countless clones of Wuming and blasted into the distance. Once again, there was a big explosion in the world. Wuming did not expect Gidea's humanoid cannon to be able to fire without a launcher. After all, he did not expect Gidea to be able to turn the energy from burning human history into a relic. He could only say that he did not know enough about it. Thanks to Wuming's carelessness, many more worlds were destroyed by this attack. Ha 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 ha! Dragon of Origin, you are too naive. Gaia laughed delightedly. It did not expose that the humanoid cannon was Gidea's relic. This was one of the trump cards that Gidea had left behind. Looking at the clones of Wuming disappearing into the flood of relic, Gidea once again gathered energy in its chest and was ready to fire again to kill Wuming. Silent Ming dispelled the dragon body and created a clone. He wanted to take the opportunity to pretend to be a clone and get close to Gaia to rescue Chaldea. Gaia had already guessed it. Although Gaia couldn't tell which one was the main body, she could just destroy all of the clones, and that would be enough. Die. Ars Almadel Salamones. The time of birth has come, thus correcting all things. However, just as Gidea was about to release the second relic, tens of weapons flew toward Gidea out of thin air. It seemed like they were long-range attacks. Gidea did not think that those things could hurt him, so he did not care about those weapons at all. In fact, the weapons hit Gidea, but they did not have any effect at all. They could not even break through Gidea's defense. There was not even a spark. However, in the next second, a transparent spherical light film with a diameter of more than 10 meters enveloped Gidea. What's this? Gidea recognized the spherical light that enveloped him. It was Wuming's defensive skill. It seemed to be a relic. Wuming had used this skill to block Gidea's attack in the beginning. Gidea had witnessed the defensive power of this thing. If Gidea were to release his own relic, he might not be able to break through the spherical light film. However, if Gidea were to give up on releasing his relic, he would obviously fall into Wuming's trap. Therefore, Gidea maintained his relic until he was about to release it. Since there was no blind spot in the defensive light film, Wuming would definitely make a move when he entered. It would not be too late to release it then, when, later on, Gidea began to think. Could be those weapons just now? Gidea had some guesses. This was a relic with a physical form. Moreover, it was very likely that it had mixed in with the dozens of weapons just now and approached Gidea together. That was why Gidea was enveloped by the light film. In reality, Gidea had guessed correctly. Wuming used the Manchala formation to release a large number of weapons and hid his paradox armor among them. Wuming believed that Gidea would not stop releasing his relic because of a few weapons that were not enough to deter him. As expected, Gidea was hit because of this. Suddenly, the 9 rings on Gidea's fingers flashed. The 9 rings left behind by King Solomon were not just for show. Even if they were almost useless against Wuming, they could provide Gidea with part of his wisdom. Gidea began to think again. There was no need for Wuming to get close to Gidea to take back Chaldea. Wuming could totally attack Gidea first. After all, Wuming knew that he could use pure origin power to hurt Gidea without affecting Chaldea. In the next second, a gap appeared in the spherical light film that enveloped Gidea. An extremely large flood surged into the spherical light film. The flood contained a large amount of pure origin power and could cause great harm to Gidea. However, the flood would cause very little harm to Chaldea. It could be said that it was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Seeing this, Gidia was even more certain that he had understood Wu Ming's intention. At that moment, the relic that he had gathered earlier was instantly launched toward the gap. Hundreds of millions of rays of light that were comparable to the star creation Holy Sword instantly blocked the gap that appeared in the spherical light film. Before the flood that entered through the gap could splash onto Gidia, the gap was blocked. Now, Gidia thought that he had more or less understood Wu Ming's moves. If it was the same move again, Gidia was confident that he would not fall for it. Just as Gidia was thinking that, there was a fluctuation in front of Gidia. Wu Ming appeared out of nowhere and slashed Gidia with the divine blade of salvation. Swoosh! Bang! At the same time, the spherical light film that surrounded Gidia shattered, and Gidia was sent flying again. It was exactly the same as the previous scene. However, this time, Wu Ming had an additional item in his hand. The Chaldea crystal ball was in Wu Ming's hand when he slashed Gidia. It's all thanks to you, Kalas. Wu Ming praised Kalas. It's my duty and honor, Master. Kalas answered respectfully. Wu Ming's goal from the beginning was never to attack Gidia, but to take back Chaldea. Wu Ming had indeed hidden in his clone for Gidia to see, letting Gidia know that Wu Ming's goal was Chaldea. After that, the armor of paradox and the flood, mixed with the source of power, were just a feint to make Gidia think that Wu Ming's goal was Gidia. Taking advantage of Gidia releasing its noble artifact and thinking that it had seen through Wu Ming's scheme, Wu Ming used all his strength to drive the Phoenix incarnation to expand the gap and instantly appeared in front of Gidia, and finally succeeded in snatching Chaldea from Gidia's hands. The reason why Wu Ming praised Kalas was entirely because, whether it was the timing of Gidia's relaxation or the subtle operation of the gap in the light film, it was all done by Kalas. In short, Kalas deserved Wu Ming's praise. Ignoring Gidia, Wu Ming took the lead to check Chaldea. After all, Chaldea had fallen into Gidia's hands. Who knew if Gidia had done anything to Chaldea? However, just as Wu Ming was investigating the inside of the crystal ball, a demon god pillar suddenly emerged from the crystal ball, completely eating Wu Ming. Chapter 10:50. The demon god pillar came so suddenly that Wu Ming did not even have time to react before he was completely engulfed by the demon god pillar. At this time, Gidia, who stabilized himself after flying backwards, laughed loudly. Ha ha ha! You didn't expect it, did you? Dragon of Origin, I have already released Floro's seal. I have been waiting for you to take back Chaldea. That's right. As early as when Gidia took back Chaldea, Gidia had already released Floros from the Holy Grail. The wisdom provided by King Solomon's 9 rings to Gidia was not that simple. Gidia's plan was inseparable from that wisdom. After Floros broke free from the seal, it had been lurking in Chaldea, transforming into Leviticus. While chatting with the people in Chaldea and persuading them to surrender, it was silently waiting for the right time. And this time was the moment when Wu Ming took back Chaldea. Therefore, the reason why Wu Ming was able to take back Chaldea was also part of Gidia's plan. In order to not let you see any clues, I spent a lot of effort to let you successfully take back Chaldea. Now, enjoy the feast of the Black Origin Mud that I left for you. The Black Origin Mud was Wu Ming's natural enemy. But to completely kill him, the first way was to use the Black Origin Mud to continuously attack Wu Ming. The second way was to use more Black Origin Mud than Wu Ming could bear to swallow Wu Ming in one fell swoop. This was like insecticide and mosquitoes. Spraying insecticide at mosquitoes, because of the airflow and other external factors, mosquitoes would not die instantly. Therefore, it was necessary to continuously spray insecticide at mosquitoes to achieve the goal of killing them. However, if the mosquitoes were directly soaked in the insecticide, even if they were not poisoned to death, they would drown. It was simple and crude. The first move was obviously unreliable against Wu Ming. After all, Wu Ming wasn't weak, so there was no way he could use the Black Origin soil to continuously attack Wu Ming. As such, he had no choice but to use the second move. Therefore, Gidia planned this conspiracy and gave almost all of the Origin Black soil to Floros for safekeeping. He only kept a little for himself to use as a means of attack. Gideon was prepared to use the Black Origin mud to devour Wuming and kill him. And now, their scheme had succeeded. What a pity, Origin Dragon. I still can't forget the pain you gave me. I have to thank you properly. There is clearly something wrong with the demon god pillar Flawless's voice. It was meaningless. Flawless's brain must have become abnormal in the seal of endless darkness. One should know that Flawless was sealed by one of the 12 incarnations, the warrior incarnation with the golden sword. That was the golden sword that separated Flawless from the concept of the 72 demon god pillars. The seal on the golden sword was a seal that transcended time and space. Who knew how long Flawless had stayed in the seal for? Although I can't punish you personally, letting you drown in the Black Origin soil is the biggest punishment for you. Ha ha! To Wuming, the Black Origin soil could be said to be the poison of all poisons. Letting Wuming drown in the Black Origin soil, Wuming would undoubtedly suffer intense pain in both his body and soul before he died. There was indeed no punishment more severe than this. The demon god Pillar Flawless kept squirming. A trace of the Black Origin soil leaked out from Flawless's body. From the very beginning, after swallowing Wuming, Flawless began to squirm. That was the Black Origin soil that existed in Flawless's body rioting. It was like a stone that was thrown into a lake. After Wuming was swallowed by the demon god Pillar, Wuming's consciousness became blurry. The words of Gideon and Flawless were also intermittently transmitted into Wuming's mind. It couldn't be helped. This time, Flawless and Gideon really put in a lot of effort. The amount of Black Origin soil that Flawless preserved could be said to be beyond Wuming's imagination. Once Wuming was swallowed, he couldn't maintain his consciousness. After all, the amount of Black Origin soil was just too much. Wuming was suffering extreme pain in his soul and body all the time. His blurry consciousness was also caused by this pain. I've underestimated Gaia. Wuming's mind was in a disjointed state. Master, you can do what you did last time and transfer your consciousness to the backup machine again. This way, you can avoid the Black Origin soil's damage to your soul. Kalis instantly calculated the answer. What about you guys? Wuming forced himself to be alert and talked to Kalis and Enkidu. We can help you protect your body. Enkidu answered. Don't even think about it. Wuming interrupted Enkidu without hesitation. If that was the case, Wuming's consciousness and soul could be preserved. However, this body would be finished. This body that had lost its mental resistance would definitely be completely consumed by the Black Origin soil. Even if Enkidu and Kala stayed behind to protect Wuming's body, they would definitely not be able to block it as easily as last time when Wuming's body fell into the box world. In other words, Enkidu and Kalis would definitely die with Wuming's body. Only Wuming will be left alive. I promised you guys that I would never abandon you guys and escape alone. Master, shut up. Master Wuming, I refuse. Kalis and Enkidu shut their mouths. After all, they knew how stubborn Wuming was. When it came to matters like this, once Wuming had made up his mind, he would definitely not change it unless there was a chance for a change. But now, a chance for a change was really hard to come by. Talking to Kalis and Enkidu had strengthened Wuming's consciousness quite a bit. In other words, he could still hold on for now. There was no such thing as a dead end. If there was a dead end, then it was definitely because the person involved had not found a way out. Wuming decided to find a way out before his consciousness completely disappeared. Immediately, Wuming checked his abilities. Because of the Black Origin soil's continuous corrosion, I can't use them at all, whether it was the 12 incarnations, magic, or magic, he could not use them at all. In the instant that Wuming gathered his energy to use them, the Black Origin soil would corrode the energy that Wuming gathered. Hence, he could not use them at all. Some of the gadgets and items that Wuming kept in his Dragoness dimension could not be used in the current situation. Naturally, the physical relics and weapons could not be used. They were all hidden in the divine blade of salvation that was one with Wuming. Meanwhile, Wu Ming's divine blade of salvation was already curled up in Wu Ming's body, not daring to come out at all. Even the armor of paradox that was created by Artoria to create a time paradox seemed to have lost its motivation to live and was waiting for death. As expected, there was too much black origin soil. Because Wu Ming used all of these things, almost all of them had a trace of origin power. In the face of so much black origin soil, there was no doubt that they were restrained. Naturally, it was reasonable for them to be afraid. As of now, Wu Ming really could not find a way to solve the current crisis. However, at this moment, Wu Ming suddenly felt that the black origin soil's corrosion on him seemed to have weakened. That was because Wu Ming's pain suddenly decreased a lot, and it was still weakening. Wu Ming's consciousness also slowly dissipated and became completely awake. The black origin soil was gradually accepting Wu Ming, or rather, Wu Ming was gradually adapting to the black origin soil. Wu Ming discovered that the source of all this phenomenon was a small part of the black origin soil that existed in his body. Chapter 1051. For some reason, the black mud that Wu Ming had left in his body had fused with the source power in Wu Ming's body. Because the fusion was slow and Wu Ming was focused on fighting Gidia, he did not notice this. However, most importantly, the black mud that had fused with the source power did not pose a threat to Wu Ming. On the contrary, the fused energy even helped Wu Ming get through his current predicament. The black mud was still rioting, but it did not harm Wu Ming anymore. Instead, it even replenished Wu Ming's energy. Although it was slow, this was the truth. So it's only starting now. Wu Ming finally understood that this was the result of Wu Ming's previous attempt to use the black origin mud to summon power. At that time, it was probably because there was too little black origin mud. Now, Wu Ming was directly soaking in the black origin mud. In addition, the black origin mud in Wu Ming's body, which had fused with the power of origin, had a stimulating effect. With these two factors working together, it successfully caused a phenomenon that Wu Ming had never seen before. This power seems to be the source power. Wu Ming sensed the power after the black mud fused with the source power and found that this power seemed to be the source power. It is indeed the source power, but it's different from my source power. After the fusion, Wu Ming felt that the new power was the source power, and it was almost the same as before. However, if one had to compare it to the source power of the past, then the source power of the past was still underage, while the source power of the current source power could be considered adult. Could this be the secret of adulthood? No, it was definitely not that simple. After all, apart from the source power of the adult version in Wu Ming's body, there were no other changes. Could it be because there wasn't enough of it? After all, this had happened before, so Wu Ming's guess was not wrong. Wu Ming let go of his body and mind. He closed his eyes and allowed the black mud to enter his body. Under the guidance of a new power, it continuously produced new source power. Afterwards, he used this source power to cleanse his body again and again. Wu Ming's goal was very simple. Since the source power was adult and Wu Ming's body was underage, would using the adult source power to cleanse Wu Ming's underage body be able to allow Wu Ming to transform? That was what Wu Ming guessed. No matter what, he had to give it a try. However, most of the time, the truth was just that simple. After being continuously baptized by origin power, Wu Ming's body had indeed changed slightly. Wu Ming opened his eyes and sensed his body. No matter how he looked at it, nothing had changed, but Wu Ming could feel in his heart that the current him and the him a few minutes ago were on two completely different levels. Is this the power of the great origin? Wu Ming's pupils had turned golden, and the center of his pupils was still red, but it was no longer wine red. Instead, it was a fiery red that was full of vitality. At this moment, Wu Ming felt as if he had just woken up from a dream. Many things seemed to automatically appear in Wu Ming's mind. It was about the origin dragon, the origin black soil, and the great origin. If the Type Moon world's origin was the origin of everything that gave birth to the Type Moon world, then the great origin was the origin of all the worlds that gave birth to it. Regardless of whether it was the world that Wu-ming had first stayed in, the type moon world, or the other worlds that Wu-ming had experienced, they were all born from the Great Origin. They took root and sprouted between the worlds, becoming powerful worlds that gave birth to life and flourished. The Origin Dragon was actually a guardian deity that protected and complemented the Great Origin. At the same time, it was also a guardian deity that protected the worlds that were born from the Great Origin. This was why the two great restraints of the Type Moon world had so generously allowed Wu-ming to cheat, open a backdoor, and even form a contract with him. It was because the two great restraints knew about Wu-ming's identity. If Wu-ming was in the two great restraints' shoes, he would have done the same thing. Although it was a cliché, the Origin Dragon was truly an existence that protected the stable development of each world. It was responsible for resolving the apocalyptic crisis of each world, and it had unparalleled power that could easily resolve a world's crisis. Although the Type Moon world had given birth to parallel worlds and used this method to escape the apocalypse, it wouldn't be a loss to curry favor with Wu-ming, so it had done so. As for worlds without parallel worlds, the Origin Dragon wouldn't take action when species changed or went extinct, because the world wouldn't be destroyed as a result, and new species would be born. It was only when an irreversible apocalyptic crisis occurred that the Origin Dragon would either appear with a certain identity to save the world, or it would directly take action. In short, the apocalyptic crisis of the world would always be resolved. To put it simply, the Origin Dragon was a so-called god to each world. From a certain perspective, it could be considered a god in the truest sense. After all, the Origin Dragon and the Great Origin Dragon complemented each other. It represented the Great Origin, and the Great Origin represented it. However, even if it was the origin of all worlds, even if it was the Great Origin that transcended all existences, there would still be death. Existence was the embodiment of life, and this existence would definitely experience death. However, the Great Origin's death wasn't the usual way of death. The Great Origin's death was to enter a deep slumber, after which it would restart after a certain period of time. If there was a word to describe this, it would be reincarnation. After a reincarnation was complete, the Great Origin would continue to give birth to new worlds, while the Origin Dragon would continue to carry out its duties and protect the world. By the way, the Origin Dragon that complemented the Great Origin would also die as a result, and it would recover its strength as the Great Origin restarted. As for Wu-ming, what he experienced was the process of the Origin Dragon restarting after its death. In any case, even if Wu-ming didn't work hard, he would still recover his strength after a certain period of time. Therefore, the Origin Dragons weren't a single species. Since ancient times, there had only been one Origin Dragon living in the Great Origin, and that was the current Wu-ming. This explained why Wu-ming hadn't seen a single Origin Dragon when he first came to the Great Origin. The Origin Dragon's aura that Wu-ming sensed back then was also left behind by him. After all, this was his home. In that case, the Origin Dragon that White Yiksha saw might very well be my past self. At that time, Wu-ming might very well have been on his way to resolve an apocalyptic crisis in a certain world, and White Yiksha saw him along the way. Although he knew the truth, Wu-ming was still worried. There was only one Origin Dragon in existence. What if something happened to the Origin Dragon while it was still in hibernation? What would they do? Could it be that the root of origin would create another one? In that case, the Origin Dragon in the past might not have been Wu-ming. Wu-ming was destined to not get an answer at the moment. Also, what was up with the Black Origin Mud, the natural enemy of the Origin Dragons? Moreover, the Black Origin Mud was currently fusing with the Origin power in Wu-ming's body, stimulating Wu-ming's growth and giving Wu-ming new strength. Was this a natural enemy or a boost? Unfortunately, that was all the information that appeared in Wu-ming's mind. It was probably because Wu-ming hadn't fully matured yet. Either that, or he would only know the rest after returning to the Great Origin. "Listen," Wu-ming called out. "Master, Lord Wu-ming." A golden heaven lock vaguely appeared on Wu-ming's arm, while the crown on Wu-ming's head glowed. The two were responding to Wu-ming. Although they didn't know what had happened, they knew that Wooming had survived the danger. That was all they needed to know. It's time to go out and end this. Chapter 1052. In the outside world, Gydia, who had rested for a while, sat down on a random spot in the time god's palace. Gydia had paid a price for creating a situation where he could kill Wooming completely. He had been injured by Wooming several times. After all, he had put on a good show. But fortunately, the plan had succeeded. When Gydia thought about how he could get rid of all future troubles, the pain on his body did not hurt as much. Next, we'll reach the root and achieve our great cause. Although Gydia was Wooming's enemy, his thoughts were also based on the great cause. That was why Gydia did not think that he had done anything wrong. At this moment, he only felt slightly emotional and perplexed because the great cause was about to be achieved. He was emotional that after thousands of years of hard work, he had finally achieved his goal. He was perplexed about what he should do next after achieving his goal. When anyone's final goal was about to be achieved, if he did not die, he would definitely feel perplexed about the future. Moreover, Gydia was someone who had no friends, relatives, family, or hobbies. He only had the ultimate goal of saving the world through the burning of human principles. I miss the king a little. Gydia used the burning of human principles after all. It was just a magic technique. Although he called himself the demon god king, he did not have many subordinates under him. Although the 72 demon god pillars were Gydia's subordinates in name and treated Gydia as their king, Gydia was an amalgamation of the 72 demon god pillars' consciousnesses. When Gydia spoke to different people, he would show different personalities. This was also because Gydia was an amalgamation of the 72 demon god pillars' consciousnesses. Gydia could be said to be a loner. It could only be said that Gydia's relationship with the 72 demon god pillars was rather strange. Gydia was one of the 72 demon god pillars, but not the 72 demon god pillars. Gydia was an individual, but also a whole like the 72 demon god pillars. As a result, once Gydia died, the 72 demon god pillars as a whole would collapse and cease to exist. But as long as Gydia was still alive, even if the 72 demon god pillars all died at once, with Gydia's current strength, he would be able to summon them back. At the same time, Gydia was an amalgamation of the consciousness of the 72 demon god pillars. This meant that the demon god pillars were actually a kind of technique. The 72 demon god pillars were the same as Gydia's, both of them burning the principles of humanity. As tactics, once they achieved the goal they had set a long time ago, they would definitely fall into emptiness. This was because they were the ones being used, not the ones dominating. Even if they won, it would not change the fact that they were tactics. That was why Gydia said, "I miss the king." As for the king that Gydia mentioned, it was naturally King Solomon. If that's the case, why don't you go and see him yourself? Hearing this, Gydia was shocked. The demon god Pillar Floros also shook violently. However, Floros was not shocked. It was because Wooming was cutting open its stomach. Poochie, after the sound, a hole suddenly appeared on the huge demon god pillar. It was open from the inside. The demon god pillar, Floros, was like a deflated balloon or a frosted eggplant. The entire demon god pillar shrank because of this hole and withered. And from the hole that suddenly appeared on the demon god pillar Floros, a stream of light instantly flew out. It floated in the sky and revealed a figure. It was Wooming. "You're actually still alive?" Gydia was in disbelief. This feeling was like you clearly soaked a mosquito in insecticide, but after a while, the mosquito reappeared in front of you alive and kicking. It even changed from a centimeter in size into a monster. Who wouldn't be shocked? And after being shocked, Gydia became angry. The existence that you thought you could kill didn't die, but was still alive and kicking. Who wouldn't be angry? As for Floros, it was already too busy to care about itself. It didn't have time to be angry or shocked. Floros was like a fish out of water. Its whole body struggled in pain. Then, after struggling a few times, it stopped moving. In the next second, Floros melted and turned into a pool of black matter floating in the air. Wuming waved his hand and attracted the black matter. It integrated into his body, and a lot of new origin power was generated. That's right, the black matter after Floros melted was the origin black mud. Wuming used it and absorbed it into his body. You actually assimilated with the origin black mud? Did you reverse it? No matter how stupid Gidia was, he could see that this was Wuming's trick. At this moment, in Gidia's understanding, Wuming was now in a reverse state, which was quite popular among the servants. The so-called altar. Wuming's pupils were now golden, and his pupils were fiery red, which was probably the characteristic of his altar. Otherwise, how could he turn Floros into the origin black mud and absorb it? One must know that the origin black mud was like poison to Wuming. I just happened to get a new power. For Gidia's guess, Wuming did not give a positive answer. Although it was not a secret, Wuming also knew that his change was not something worth telling the enemy. However, Wuming's ambiguous words, in Gidia's ears, was admitting that Wuming had been altered. "Come and try my new power, Gidia," Wuming shouted and waved his hand. Countless origin black mud like monstrous waves appeared out of thin air behind Wuming, raised high, and rushed toward Gidia. This posture was bound to cover Gidia in an instant. Now, Gidia also realized that he may no longer be Wuming's opponent, but even so, Gidia would not give up. My great cause, my ideals, the meaning of my birth will never end with being destroyed by you. Gidia seemed to be going all out. His body trembled violently and then began to burn. This was Gaia, the burning of human principle style, using all the power of the burning of human principles. My name is Gidia, humanity burning humanity. Demonic King Gidia. Gidia's muscles were tight, as if all of his energy was about to explode. Then Gidia hugged his chest and clenched his fists. The muzzle-like thing on Gidia's chest began to gather purple energy that was so red that it was black. Gaia had gathered so much energy that her entire body was cracking. She suddenly spread out her arms, and the purple energy that had gathered in front of her chest, which was so purple that it was turning black and red, suddenly shot out. Third relic, activate. The time of birth has come. Use this to correct everything. This is my everything. Ars, Almadel, Salamones. Gidia's relic was released at a scale that had never been seen before on Wuming. Gidia's body was cracking at an accelerated speed. Such an enormous amount of energy was not something that Gidia could release in one go. Perhaps, even if Gidia won, it would be overloaded and cause its body to collapse. Gidia was going for broke. This was a battle where there was no victory, and it was a battle where one's life was at stake. This was Gidia's farewell, and at the same time, it was Gidia's unwillingness. All of this ended as the unimaginable giant pillar of black-red aurora collided with the black mud that was like a monstrous wave. There was no explosion as expected. There was only a white light that was produced when the two collided. The white light seemed to have covered the entire world in an instant. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. However, the most important thing was that everything had ended. Chapter 1053. An unknown amount of time had passed. Inside the root of origin on the central platform, Wuming, who had transformed into his human form, was squatting on the giant dragon head of his backup machine. He placed one hand on the machine as if he was inspecting it. Magic circles appeared around Wuming's backup machine. Not long after, the magic circles disappeared. Wuming's hand left the backup machine as he stood up. That should do it. Wuming patted his dust-free hands. Master, is that all you need to do with the backup machine? Colos's voice came from his side. There's no problem. Now, this backup machine of mine can replace me to protect the world between worlds. All of this started from, Wuming did not pay attention to the time. In short, it started from when Wuming ended his battle with Gidia. Just as Gidia said, Wuming had assimilated with the black origin mud, and Wu Ming's new moves were related to the new origin power. Whether it was turning Floros into the black origin mud, or summoning a terrifying amount of black origin mud to defeat Gidia, who almost killed himself, it was all because of the fusion of the black origin mud and the origin power. Wu Ming's new origin power. Although he did not understand the theory behind it, Wu Ming was not someone who was easily confused. Everything would be clear when he returned to the root of origin. However, after Wu Ming defeated Gidia, he did not kill it. Instead, he kept it alive. As for why he saved Gidia, it was not because of Wu Ming's kindness, but because Roman suddenly appeared in front of Wu Ming. Gidia, who had lost all its energy and almost died, was no different from before, or even worse. Roman used his connection with Gidia to successfully escape from Chaldea. Roman's words were simple. "Spare his life, please." As for the reason, Roman did not say. According to Roman, he seemed to have obtained information about Gidia when Floros was persuading him to surrender in Chaldea. After that, after Gidia was defeated by Wu Ming, he used the power of the 10th ring, which was the ring that Gidia was missing, to walk out of Chaldea and meet with Wu Ming. Wu Ming gave Roman a lot of face. He immediately agreed to Roman's request, or rather, he agreed to King Solomon's request. However, Roman's appearance was no longer that of Roman Aikman, but that of King Solomon, whom Wu Ming had seen at the Singularity in London. After all, Roman had used the power of King Solomon's ring. Naturally, Solomon, which was Roman's original appearance, was revealed. This also meant that Roman had exposed the secret that he was King Solomon in Chaldea. When Wu Ming asked Solomon about the expressions of the people in Chaldea when he transformed, Solomon's face was subtle. Wu Ming, who did not expose Solomon's secret, ended the questioning and sent Chaldea back to the original world. The world's people also recovered because of Gidia's loss of power. Chaldea could be said to have succeeded in saving the world. Although it was not direct, it could be regarded as saving the world indirectly. After that, Wu Ming did not rush to return to the Great Root. Instead, he stayed in Chaldea to help Chaldea deal with the remaining problems. After all, in that world, people's perception was that they just slept for a year. Not to mention ordinary people, the clock tower would definitely ask about it. What could those magicians do to Chaldea, the hero who saved the world? Even if he used his toes to think, Wu Ming knew what they would do to him. There is no doubt that the servants summoned in Chaldea would be repatriated, and Chaldea would be disintegrated. Chaldea's instruments and components would be preserved, sealed, and even studied by one magic family, organization, and even the clock tower. After all, Chaldea was a dangerous organization that crossed the timeline and had a large number of servants that could be regarded as weapons of war. Even if Chaldea saved the world, the magicians of the clock tower would certainly not allow Chaldea to continue to exist. Moreover, there was no direct evidence to prove that Chaldea saved the world. What about Chaldea's data records? Video records? Sorry, it could also be achieved by using magic. There were also many magicians who believed that something did happen in this blank year, but Chaldea only survived for a year because of the magnetic field. That is, he spent this period of time awake and wanted to take credit for it. In short, Chaldea would face a lot of trouble. Although it was said that Olga Marie, Da Vinci, Roman, and others would not be difficult to solve all the problems, but it was still slightly difficult for them to solve all the problems once and for all. Olga Marie's third method was not yet understood, so she was not the third magician. Although Da Vinci was omnipotent, she was, after all, a weapon recognized by the clock tower. After Roman became Roman and asked Wu Ming to spare Gidia's life, he resumed his identity as Roman. With his temperament, it was impossible for him to let King Solomon appear again. Roman was just a Roman, the highest person in charge of Chaldea's medical department. These three, whether taken out individually or together, were not enough. At least, most of the magicians in the clock tower would not buy it. Therefore, they needed Wu Ming's help. Wu Ming went directly to the clock tower. In a room that Wu Ming often visited in the clock tower, Wu Ming found that person. Second enchanter, gemstone Ankasha, Zelrich, Subi and Ogu. Wu Ming easily met Zelik. Wu Ming even suspected that this guy had already guessed that Wu Ming would go to him for help. That's right. Wu Ming looked for Zelik to let Zelik help Chaldea deal with the aftermath. As the second magician, there would always be people who would give him face. Even if they did not give him face, Zelik also had a lot of connections. It would be quite easy for him to help deal with the aftermath. And Wu Ming also asked Zelik for a list of magicians and magician families who would definitely make a move against Chaldea. That night, he turned into something terrifying and visited these magicians. He bluntly told them that if they still wanted to reach out to Chaldea, the next time they would be annihilated. Finally, Wu Ming also tampered with the magic seals that had been passed down in their families in front of these magicians. This was a naked conspiracy. Those magicians who could not resist Wu Ming at all could only choose to compromise in fear. Now, Chaldea had a very long buffer. As long as Olga Marie mastered the third magician at that time, coupled with Olga Marie's status as one of the 12 monarchs, she would definitely have the right to speak no less than Zelik. The third magician was one of the 5 remaining magicians in the world. The other magician also had the help of a powerful magician who could travel through time and summon servants. There was also a powerful existence who could tamper with the magic seals of the Clock Tower magician family. With these, there was no doubt that Chaldea would not be in any danger. Speaking of danger, Wu Ming thought of another thing. Kalas, I remember that there was an alien existence outside Chaldea, right? Chapter 10:54. Wu Ming turned to look at Kalas. Master, don't worry. Enkidu is basically done. He's taking care of the aftermath. When Wu Ming put Chaldea back in place, he accidentally discovered an existence that could be called an alien. This existence was paying attention to Chaldea, who had returned to the Type Moon world. Ignoring whether or not the other party had bad intentions, they definitely didn't have any good intentions for sneaking around. Wu Ming even suspected that Gidia took Chaldea out of the Type Moon world to protect Chaldea. In short, Enkidu, who didn't think he was of much help, volunteered to take care of this matter. After figuring out the other party's identity, it was easy to let them go if they were harmless. As the Heaven Lock, Enkidu was the most powerful weapon in human history. Adding on the fact that Enkidu had been by Wu Ming's side for so long, he had absorbed a lot of origin power, which made Enkidu extraordinary. Wu Ming even personally injected new origin power into Enkidu, just in case. It could be said that Enkidu could go to the Type Moon world and call himself a god, because no one was a match for the current Enkidu. Any attack that Enkidu casually released now could be considered an attack against Suzhong. As for the alien that Wu Ming sensed, Enkidu wouldn't be afraid of it at all. That was indeed the case. Kalas had already said that Enkidu had already taken care of those matters and was taking care of the aftermath. Since that was the case, Chaldea had nothing to worry about. However, speaking of worry, Wu Ming felt that the one he should be worried about was Kalas. Wu Ming secretly glanced at Kalas, who was floating beside him. The current Kalas was no longer wearing a dragon horn headdress, but she was still not human. The current Kalas was somewhat similar to rubies and sapphires, but the rubies and sapphires were pentagrams and hexagons with wings and bows in the middle. On the other hand, Alice was a transparent hollow sphere with sharp dragon wings. In the center of the sphere, there were 3 metal rings that rotated irregularly. In the center of the 3 rings, there was a little light like a star. It had to be said that the current Kalas was very similar to Ruby and Sapphire. However, they were sisters, so it was normal for them to be similar. After all, Kalas' full name was Kalas Balit, or Lapis Lazuli. Like Ruby and Sapphire Saphia, Kalas was just Wu Ming's abbreviation for her. As for whether or not Kalas could become a wand like the Ruby and Sapphire, this question was temporarily ignored. By the way, Kalas, I've always had a question. Looking at the current appearance of Kalas, Wu Ming finally asked the question that had been in his heart. Now that I clearly have a way to turn you into a human, why don't you agree and instead choose this appearance? Wu Ming revealed a helpless expression, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Compared to the appearance of a human, I still prefer the style of my sister's phone. Kelly replied in a serious tone. However, Wuming revealed an expression of, I knew you would say that. It must be Ruby who bewitched you. Wuming responded to Collis with a gaze that saw through everything, and Collis fell into a rare silence. It seems that I guessed right. Wuming sighed. It couldn't be helped. Who told Wuming to pick up Mayu in the past 2 days? More than once he saw Ruby give up on accompanying Ilya and secretly follow him instead. Wuming glanced at Collis again. He had no intention of blaming her. I actually wanted you to experience the life of a human, but since you like this appearance, we'll leave it at that for now. After all, when Collis thought things through one day, Wuming could use the power of the Great Origin to turn Collis into a human at any time. Let's go. The arrangements here have been completed. After some time, come back and check on it. We can proceed with the next step of the plan. Wuming patted Collis, who seemed to be thinking about something. Yes, master. Wuming opened a golden teleportation door and directly went in. Meanwhile, Collis was still absent-minded. She was thinking about what Ruby had said about bewitching her. Magical girl. Collis thought as she floated and also entered the teleportation door. In Ilya's world, Shoayu residence, a golden ripple appeared, and Wuming emerged from it. After Wuming came out of the teleportation door, the first thing he did was to look at the clock on the table. At this time, Mayu should be done with school soon. Master, I'll go and prepare to welcome Lady Mayu. After flying out of the golden ripple, Collis directly flew toward the door, out of the door, and out of the door. At the door, there was a surge of magic, and a rather expensive red convertible car appeared there. This was a transformation of Collis. She had the ability to mimic. As for the size of the object she mimicked, she could do so with magic. Wuming, who was standing in front of the window and watching this scene, did not know what to say. Ever since Collis transformed into a ruby or sapphire, Collis had become even stranger. If it was in the past, Collis would definitely not have transformed into a car for Wuming to pick up Mayu. However, now, Collis would transform into a different car almost every time Wuming went to pick up Mayu. Classic, expensive, ordinary. There were all kinds of cars. This even caused Mayu's friends in school to be amazed. It could only be said that Collis was now supporting Wuming and paying more attention to daily life. She was no longer focused on combat. Forget it. I can only blame myself. Wuming sighed. Collis' change might have been caused by Wuming's words back then. Wuming's original intention was to let Collis live alone. Collis probably thought that Wuming no longer needed Collis. Although that was indeed the case. After all, the secret of the black soil and the root of everything was completely understood when Wuming returned to the root of everything after resolving the matter with Chaldea. Wuming had also entered the stage of adulthood. After Wuming returned to the root of everything, the root of everything became a little enthusiastic, as though it was welcoming a blood-related relative. That's right, it was enthusiastic. After that, Wuming also received the information and secrets that he needed to know from the root of everything. There was only one root dragon. If one had to describe it, the root dragon was the materialization of the root of everything. It did not mean that the root of everything could create a new one after the root dragon died. Therefore, the root dragon that White Yiksha had seen back then was Wuming. As for the problem of the root dragon's reincarnation becoming weak, the root dragon would actually fall into a deep slumber with the root of everything and would recover after a certain period of time after the root of everything's reincarnation. It would not fall into a certain world when it was extremely weak. In other words, Wuming's situation was just an accident. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.